So what if the secret to generating nearly $10 million dollars in just 8 days didn't start in some corporate boardroom?
Right.
What if it actually started with a $4.50 article about buckwheat pillows and, honestly, a crippling case of agoraphobia?
I mean, it is the ultimate paradox, right? The paradox of scale.
Yeah, totally.
Because we are talking about topping an affiliate leaderboard with exactly $9,894,008 in an 8-day window.
Which just, I mean, that's absurd.
It is. And beating the second place finisher by nearly $8 million, like that level of volume isn't just, a successful week.
Right, it's a whole different game.
Exactly. It requires a structural manipulation of consumer psychology at a massive scale. But the crazy part is the architectural blueprint for that $10 million launch.
Yeah.
It was drafted by a guy who, 8 years prior, was living in a one-bedroom apartment with his dad, terrified to even step outside.
Wow.
Yeah, making $12 an hour painting houses.
Okay, so welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. Today we're exploring this really incredible origin story.
It really is wild.
It is. We are looking at the foundational philosophy of a true master marketer, a guy who turned that $12 an hour painting job into an absolute empire.
And we're going to unpack exactly how he did it.
Right. You're going to discover why shaping perception actually matters way more than just having a good product, and how to calibrate your brain to consume business knowledge based on your actual experience level.
Which is vital. I mean, absolutely vital for anyone listening who wants to build or scale a business.
Exactly. But I want to linger on that $4.50 for a second.
The ground zero.
Yes, the absolute ground zero of this empire, because the instinct is to just laugh it off, right?
Sure, yeah.
$4.50 for a 400-word article about buckwheat pillows.
It sounds like nothing.
Right. In the grand scheme of a $10 million empire, it literally sounds like a rounding error. But mechanically speaking, I suspect that little microtransaction is doing some heavy lifting.
Oh, it is doing all of the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
You have to consider the cognitive leap that's required here. Like, when you spend your days doing manual labor.
Just exhausted.
Exactly. Standing in a room, breathing paint fumes all day, your back aching. You are literally trading your physical decay for a fixed hourly wage.
$12 an hour.
Right. So the internet economy, to someone in that position, is completely abstract. It feels totally hypothetical.
It doesn't feel like real money.
No, not at all. For a house painter in the early 2000s, writing a little article about buckwheat pillows and having digital currency suddenly appear in a bank account,
It's like magic.
it fundamentally shatters the established paradigm of how money is created.
Because it breaks the whole equation of, like, physical exertion equals compensation.
Precisely. It proves the mechanism. It creates this totally new neurological feedback loop.
Okay, I see that.
Before that $4.50 clears, digital marketing is just a theory.
Right.
But once it clears, it becomes a science. The brain immediately computes, hey, if a 400-word input regarding this totally obscure agricultural byproduct yields $4.
Then the output is scalable.
Exactly. It is no longer a question of whether the machine works. It's simply a matter of increasing the input and optimizing the leverage.
Okay, I see the logic there, but I have to challenge the reality of surviving that transition.
Fair enough.
Because we are looking at an 8-year gap between the buckwheat pillow and the $10 million.
Right, it wasn't overnight.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And the math of scale makes sense in retrospect, but, human beings don't live in retrospect.
No, they live in the messy day-to-day.
Exactly. In year 2, when you are exhausted, you're covered in primer, and the internet is only yielding, what, a few $dozen a week?
Maybe, yeah.
The abstraction of scale doesn't pay your rent.
Okay.
The $12 an hour painting job is a tangible, immediate survival mechanism. So what psychological mechanism actually prevents someone from just abandoning the digital pennies and going back to the guaranteed physical dollars?
Well, you're touching on a really fundamental driver of human behavior here.
Okay.
It's the distinction between toward motivation and away from motivation.
Okay. Break that down for me.
So most people assume that massive success is driven by this burning desire to move toward something.
Like toward wealth or a fancy car.
Luxury status. But when you actually look at the mechanics of his daily routine during this early period, it's pretty clear the fuel was entirely different.
It wasn't the yacht.
No. He was waking up at dawn to work on the computer, going to the painting job all day, and coming home to work on the computer until he literally collapsed.
Oh, wow.
That isn't the behavior of someone merely chasing a yacht. That is the behavior of someone running for their life.
Running from the paint fumes.
Running from the absolute soul-crushing ceiling of manual labor.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The physical exhaustion of painting houses provided this stark, inescapable contrast. Manual labor caps your earning potential strictly to your physical output.
And your physical output inevitably declines
Right.
as you get older.
Exactly. So the exhaustion wasn't just a byproduct of his job. It became the catalytic away from motivation.
He needed the misery.
He really did. He needed the sheer misery of the physical labor to provide the escape velocity required to sustain that digital hustle during those early low-yield years.
Man, that reframes the whole concept of the grind entirely.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, because we tend to view the early days of a business as, a necessary evil, something to just be endured and quickly forgotten once the money finally arrives.
Right, just get through it.
But you're suggesting the grueling nature of that baseline is actually a structural requirement.
Yeah.
Like if his day job had been a comfortable air-conditioned corporate gig paying, say, $70,000 a year.
He probably never would have pushed through the friction.
Right. The friction of that buckwheat pillow phase would have just been too much bother.
I would argue it's highly unlikely he would have pushed through. Comfort is the absolute enemy of extreme outperformance.
The contrast is what forces the adaptation.
Exactly.
Okay, which brings us to the most complex and frankly kind of counterintuitive aspect of this whole origin story.
Just psychology.
Yes. We have the physical contrast of the manual labor, but the internal psychological baseline is even more extreme.
It really is.
Around 2003, he wasn't just tired from painting. He was completely paralyzed by agoraphobia.
Right.
His sympathetic nervous system was in this state of constant misfiring overdrive to the point where just leaving his house felt like a mortal threat.
A literal life or death situation in his brain.
Exactly. And what is he doing while trapped indoors? He's trying and failing to become a rap music producer in Iowa.
I know, the juxtaposition is almost absurd.
It is.
But it highlights a critical reality about baseline mental states. Agoraphobia isn't just like a quirky personality trait. It is a profound systemic failure of risk assessment.
The brain is perceiving a lethal threat where none exists. It's like having a commercial smoke detector installed in a tiny kitchen.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. The hardware might be functioning perfectly according to its programming, but if it triggers the building's entire sprinkler system every time you try to just toast a piece of bread.
The restaurant shuts down. You can't cook.
Exactly. He couldn't operate in the physical world because his internal alarm system was destroying the kitchen.
That is an incredibly accurate mechanical description. His risk assessment hardware was basically bricking the system.
So how does he fix it? Because it wasn't a business strategy that fixed it.
Right. No.
Not at all.
The resolution came from a completely left-field, cross-disciplinary intervention.
Okay.
A friend of his who was a talented musician but also a former Hare Krishna monk.
As you do in Iowa.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
This friend gave him a copy of the Bhagavad Gita.
Okay, so let me just get this straight. We have an agoraphobic house painter in Iowa trying to make rap beats who is handed ancient Sanskrit philosophy by a monk. Yeah. And this is supposedly the catalyst for a $10 million marketing empire.
It is the catalyst.
I am going to need you to unpack the exact mechanics of that. How does reading the Gita recalibrate the faulty smoke detector? Because on the surface, honestly, it sounds like pure mysticism.
I get that, but it isn't mysticism. It is high-level cognitive behavioral realignment.
Okay, explain that to me.
To understand the mechanism, you really have to look at the core philosophical tenet of the Gita. Specifically, the concept of karma yoga.
The yoga of action.
Exactly. The central thesis there is that an individual has a right to the work itself, but absolutely no right to the fruits of the work.
So you do the work just to do it.
You must act because the action is necessary and aligned with your duty, but you must aggressively detach yourself from the outcome.
Action without attachment.
Exactly. Now consider the agoraphobic anxious mind.
It's constantly worried about the outcome.
Right. The anxious mind is entirely neurotically obsessed with outcomes. If I go outside, I will have a panic attack. If I release this music, people will hate it. If I fail, I am worthless.
Anxiety is a disease of outcome dependence.
That's a great way to put it. So the Gita provides this sort of philosophical firmware update.
It patches the bug.
It really does. It systematically devalues the outcome and elevates the process. For someone whose internal psychology is an absolute chaos over potential negative futures.
Just learning to do the work simply for the sake of the work.
Exactly. It's a radical deceleration of the sympathetic nervous system.
Man, I see the psychological utility there, but I have to push back a little on how this functions in a capitalist framework.
Okay, let's hear it.
Detachment sounds beautiful in a monastery, right? But business is entirely outcome-driven.
It is.
If you don't care about the fruits of your labor, the sales, the revenue, the conversion rates, you go bankrupt.
So how does a philosophy of supreme detachment actually serve someone whose goal is to eventually dominate a highly competitive, metrics-obsessed industry like direct response marketing?
Well, that is the ultimate paradox of elite performance, and it is crucial that anyone listening really grasps this.
Okay, I'm listening.
Detachment doesn't mean you don't measure the metrics. It just means your emotional stability isn't tethered to them.
Oh.
Think about it. If you are desperate for a sale, your marketing becomes needy. The prospect subconsciously detects that tension.
Yeah, you can smell desperation.
Exactly. And if you are terrified of failure, you will never test the aggressive, unconventional angles that are actually required to break through a saturated market.
So the Gita didn't make him apathetic.
No, it made him clinical.
It removed the emotional volatility from the data.
Precisely. It gave him the psychological baseline required to look at a failed campaign not as a personal indictment, but just as neutral feedback.
That is massive.
It is. You cannot master the psychology of a mass market if your own internal psychology is fragile. The stabilization had to precede the execution.
Exactly. You have to clear the systemic errors in your own risk assessment software before you can begin to accurately assess the risks and desires of a massive consumer base.
Okay, so the sequence is absolute. Stabilize the mind first, then acquire the skills.
Yes.
And his skill acquisition phase started with a very specific, traceable lineage, didn't it?
It did. It's really interesting how he stumbled into it.
Right, because he's still attempting to sell his rap music online at this point.
Yeah, the rap dream is still alive.
And he gets an email from Derek Sivers, right? The founder of CD Baby.
Yep. Sivers sends out a link to Steve Pavlina's productivity blog.
Which is like classic early internet self-help.
Total classic. And Pavlina leads him into the broader world of self-help, which naturally sort of bridges into business education.
Right, so he buys Bob Baker's guerrilla music marketing to figure out the rap career.
And Bob Baker points him directly to Dan Kennedy.
Now, Dan Kennedy. That is a massive inflection point.
Oh, huge. For those listening who might be unaware, Dan Kennedy is basically one of the most ruthless, effective architects of direct response marketing in the modern era.
He is a legend.
Truly. He doesn't teach brand awareness or, cute logo design. He teaches the hard behavioral science of making a prospect take immediate, trackable action.
Right, getting the credit card out right now.
Exactly.
And it's through Kennedy and this subsequent deep dive into marketing psychology that he arrives at the foundational thesis of his entire methodology.
Yes. The realization regarding perception versus reality.
Okay, this is a big one. The idea that how good a product actually is can only be experienced after the transaction occurs.
Right.
Prior to the transaction, the reality of the product does not exist for the consumer. Only the perception exists.
That right there is the cognitive bridge between a creator's intrinsic value and the market's wallet.
It's so true.
Most entrepreneurs operate under this really romantic delusion that reality dictates success.
The whole build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door fallacy.
Exactly. It completely ignores the actual mechanics of human decision-making.
Let's test that, actually, because I think there is a profound, almost uncomfortable truth hidden in this concept for a lot of people.
Okay, let's do a thought experiment.
All right. Let's say I engineer a piece of software that is objectively, demonstrably superior to the market leader.
Okay.
It's faster, it has fewer bugs, it generates higher ROI for the user. That is the physical reality of the product.
Got it.
If I just put it on the market with a basic explanation, you are telling me it fails. Why? If a market is rational, shouldn't efficiency eventually win out?
Well, see, you are assuming a frictionless market with infinite attention, which simply doesn't exist.
Right, everyone is distracted.
Exactly. You have to look at signaling theory and cognitive load. An objectively superior product is usually more complex, right?
It has more features.
So it requires the consumer to expend significant mental energy to understand why it is better.
They have to think about it.
Right. But if the market leader is just an average product, But it is loud, ubiquitous, and simple to understand.
It requires zero cognitive load to choose.
Exactly. The prospect relies on the heuristic of familiarity.
So the average product wins simply because it's easier to process.
Without an engineered marketing vehicle to shape the perception, to
Mhm.
actively translate that complex superiority of your software into a high-status, low-friction narrative, the superior product loses to the loud, average product every single time.
Wow.
Marketing is not a reflection of the product's reality. It
Yes.
is the creation of the product's pre-purchase reality.
I understand the mechanics of that signaling, but let me introduce a philosophical friction point here.
Sure.
Isn't this realization inherently cynical?
How do you mean?
Well, if perception outweighs reality in the transaction, it kind of incentivizes entrepreneurs to overinvest in the marketing wrapper and underinvest in the actual deliverable.
Ah, I see what you're saying.
It's like it feels like a recipe for a market flooded with beautiful, highly persuasive garbage.
It can be, and honestly, it often is.
Right.
But you are looking at it from the perspective of the grifter rather than the ethical operator.
Okay, what does the ethical operator do?
The ethical operator who builds a genuinely superior product actually has a moral imperative to master perception.
A moral imperative.
Yes. Think about it. If you know your software will legitimately save a company from bankruptcy, but you refuse to utilize the behavioral psychology of direct response marketing because you find it cynical.
You're depriving the market of the solution.
Exactly. You are letting the loud, average competitor win due to your own ideological stubbornness.
Wow, that flips the whole marketing is evil idea on its head.
It does. He realized that marketing wasn't just some necessary evil to sell his music. It was the master discipline of applied human psychology.
And his dedication to that realization was intense. I mean, he actually enrolled at Iowa State to study psychology formally, right?
He did, yeah. But the duration of that experiment is the really telling part.
Oh. How long did he last?
He dropped out after a semester and a half.
Wait, really? Why? If the goal is to master human behavior, isn't a university psychology department the logical training ground?
Not if you actually look at the syllabus.
What do you mean?
Academic psychology is largely focused on, theoretical models, historical analysis, and controlled, highly sterile environments.
Like rats in mazes.
Exactly. Rats in mazes or undergraduate students filling out multiple choice questionnaires for course credit.
Right. Very detached from the real world.
He didn't need to know how a sophomore reacts to a hypothetical scenario in a lab.
He needed real-world stakes.
Yes. He needed to know how a 45-year-old mid-level manager reacts when asked to pull out a credit card and spend $3,000 on the internet.
That is a very different psychological profile.
Completely different. He needed applied consumer psychology in highly volatile, high-stakes environments. The university just couldn't teach him that.
Which perfectly sets up the phase of his journey that I find, honestly, the most brutal.
Oh, the sacrifice.
Yes, the path to mastery. Because his original blueprint for success was just a hilariously convoluted Rube Goldberg machine.
It really was. It was the quintessential fragmented ambition of the early 2000s internet era.
Right. Walk us through the original plan.
Okay, so the plan was to paint houses for hourly wages, right?
Step 1.
And take that manual labor money to buy highly expensive, honestly questionable, get-rich-quick internet marketing courses.
Step 2.
Then use the tactics in those courses to spin up digital income streams.
Okay.
And then finally, funnel all the digital profits into funding his rap career in Muscatine, Iowa.
It is a spectacular web of displaced effort, like the means to the end.
Yeah, that's a lot of steps.
But it is so common. We see this constantly today with the whole side hustle culture.
Oh, everywhere.
People driving Ubers to fund a dropshipping store to eventually fund an independent film.
Right.
But his trajectory shifted dramatically because the plan didn't fail. Exactly. His internal desires mutated.
That mutation is the crux of mastery.
Tell me more about that.
Well, as he was consuming these internet marketing courses, something inside him shifted. He stopped looking at them as just a vehicle to fund his music.
Okay.
And he became completely seduced by the architecture of the pitch itself. He fell in love with the meta skill.
I really want to dig into that because he was buying what most people would consider absolute scam material.
Oh, absolutely. Late-night infomercial style, internet wealth products.
Most rational people look at those and see pure sleaze.
Yeah.
So what was he seeing that everyone else was missing?
He was seeing the syntax of persuasion.
The syntax.
Yeah. He stopped reading the courses for the tactical secrets they promised, which, let's be honest, were mostly garbage.
Right.
And he started reverse engineering the behavioral science of how the course was sold to him in the first place.
Oh, that's brilliant.
He was studying the copy, he was analyzing the cadence of the guarantees, the precise deployment of risk reversal, the stacking of bonuses.
He was studying the pitch, not the product.
Yeah. Exactly. He wasn't learning how to get rich quick. He was studying the applied psychology of how to make a human being bypass their logical defenses and take immediate financial action.
So he was ignoring the curriculum and studying the architecture of the classroom.
That is a perfect way to phrase it.
But here is where the story gets really harsh, I think.
The amputation.
Yes. Once he becomes mesmerized by the mechanism of marketing, he makes a decision that I think deeply conflicts with modern advice.
He burns the boats.
He decides, no more music, the rap career, the passion project that started this entire chain reaction, he kills it.
Yep.
He drops the pursuit of monkhood. He abandons everything for a singular, absolute obsession with marketing.
It was a ruthless amputation.
But is that level of ruthless amputation actually required? Because if you listen to anyone today, we are constantly told to diversify.
Right, the portfolio career.
Exactly. We're told to cultivate our passions, to have multiple streams of interest. Giving up the core passion just to master the marketing mechanism feels, I don't know, tragic.
I get why it feels that way.
Can't someone be a great musician and a great marketer simultaneously? Why the brutal singular focus?
You can absolutely be a good musician and a good marketer simultaneously.
Okay.
But we are not analyzing the path to good. We are analyzing the path to $10 million in 8 days. That is not the result of a balanced life. That is the apex of a highly competitive winner-take-all environment.
The extreme tail end of the curve.
Exactly. To reach the absolute top 0.1% in a complex discipline like consumer psychology, you simply cannot operate with a divided mind.
The cognitive bandwidth required is just too high.
Precisely. If you are dedicating 30% of your cognitive load to writing rap lyrics, you are going to lose to the competitor who is dedicating 100% of their neural pathways to understanding market inefficiencies.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
He realized that treating the most vital skill of his business marketing as a dirty chore, a mere stepping stone, was a fatal cap on his potential. When he elevated the meta skill to his primary obsession, he unlocked the necessary depth required for true mastery.
It forces a very uncomfortable audit for anyone listening right now.
It really does.
Like, what is the core meta skill in your industry that you are treating as an annoyance?
Right.
Maybe you are a brilliant software developer, but you view user interface design as a chore. Or you are a great writer, but you despise learning the mechanics of digital distribution.
Exactly.
If you view the delivery mechanism as an obstacle rather than an obsession, you will always be subjugated by someone who has mastered the mechanism.
Always. Which brings us to the final and arguably most sophisticated structural element of his foundational philosophy.
Okay, let's get into it.
Once he has achieved this mastery, once he has built the system, he doesn't just hand it to the audience. He dictates exactly how the audience is allowed to consume it.
He categorizes the learner.
Yes.
This is fascinating because it totally breaks the fourth wall of typical nonfiction advice.
It does. It's very meta.
He divides his consumers into 3 highly specific buckets before they even begin. Bucket number 1 is the virgin.
The absolute beginner.
Right. And his instruction is rigid. You must read the material cover to cover, no skipping around.
Yep.
You need the complete contextual framework because you lack the baseline vocabulary to understand isolated tactics.
Which is very true for beginners. And then bucket number 2 is the intermediate.
Right. The operator with some experience and some traction.
The instruction shifts slightly here. Read through entirely, but deploy a filter for immediate action items. Hunt for the modular pieces that can be seamlessly injected into your existing projects to optimize them.
And then we get to bucket number 3.
The pro.
Yes, the pro. The highly experienced, high-revenue operator, his instruction for the pro is kind of radical.
It really is.
He says, do not read this cover to cover, skip around, hunt aggressively for the specific advanced sections to punch up your existing assets, get your instant wins, and get out.
This tripartite structure is just a masterclass in meta-learning and audience alignment.
Why do you say that?
Well, most authors or experts possess a profound ego regarding their work.
Oh, for sure. Every word is sacred.
Exactly. They demand that everyone consume every single word they have written, linearly because they view the material as precious.
But he doesn't.
No, he is viewing the material purely as utility. He recognizes that treating a pro like a beginner isn't just inefficient, it actually breeds active resentment.
It's the equivalent of making a Formula One driver sit through a DMV instructional video on how to adjust a steering wheel before letting them on the track.
Yes.
It's insulting. It's patronizing.
Exactly. And conversely, giving a beginner the freedom to skip around and hunt for advanced hacks is a recipe for structural collapse.
Because they don't have the foundation.
Right. They will attempt to execute a high-level maneuver without the foundational stability, fail catastrophically, and then blame the system.
I see the logic for the virgin and the intermediate, but I am highly skeptical of the advice for the pro.
Okay, lay it on me.
Telling the master to just skip around and look for hacks seems dangerous.
Why is that?
Well, there is a deeply ingrained philosophy in almost every high-level discipline, from martial arts to chess, that the master must constantly, obsessively revisit the absolute fundamentals.
Sure, the white belt mentality.
Right. If the pro only hunts for advanced tweaks, don't they risk a slow degradation of their foundational skills? Don't they lose the beginner's mind?
That is a highly sophisticated counter-argument, and it touches on the decay of implicit knowledge. However, from a practical business execution standpoint, you have to factor in the specific metric of time valuation.
How so?
A true professional in direct response marketing already has the fundamentals: offer structure, risk reversal, headline formulas burned into their implicit memory.
They don't even think about it anymore.
Exactly. They perform them subconsciously. What the pro suffers from is severe diminishing returns on their most constrained asset, which is time. If a pro spends 4 hours reading foundational concepts they already execute subconsciously, the opportunity cost is massive. By explicitly giving the pro permission not to read the whole book, the author is signaling a high-status understanding of the pro's reality.
Oh, wow. It's a massive trust-building mechanism.
Precisely. The pro registers the instruction and thinks, this author understands the exact constraints of my environment. He respects my time.
That is so smart.
It is. That counterintuitive permission actually creates a stronger bond between the expert and the reader.
And I guess the pro might eventually go back and review the fundamentals anyway, simply out of respect for the author's demonstrated competence.
Exactly. But the initial engagement must prioritize surgical extraction over total immersion.
It's matching the consumption strategy to the reality of the user. It completely dismantles the idea that there is a single right way to learn.
Right. The right way is entirely dependent on the structural integrity of your existing knowledge base.
So if we pull back and synthesize the entire architecture of this introduction, it is remarkably cohesive.
It really is when you lay it all out.
We started with the sheer spectacle of the $10 million launch. But looking at the foundation, that launch was never an inevitability.
Not at all. It was the explosive result of a very deliberate, grueling sequence of adaptations.
It required the visceral, away-from motivation of manual labor to escape the gravity of a $12 an hour existence.
Right. And it required the philosophical intervention of the Bhagavad Gita to recalibrate a paralyzing, outcome-obsessed nervous system into a state of detached clinical execution.
It required the intellectual humility to realize that the reality of a product is entirely subordinate to the perception built by the marketing vehicle.
Yes, and it required the ruthless discipline to amputate original passions in favor of a singular, uncompromising obsession with the meta-skill of consumer psychology.
And finally, it required the self-awareness to understand that knowledge itself is useless if the method of consumption doesn't match the competence of the consumer.
That is the psychological bedrock. It is dense, it is unforgiving, and it is absolutely mandatory for operating at scale.
It is a long, dark, incredibly complex road, from a $4.50 buckwheat pillow article to the absolute pinnacle of an industry.
But he walked it.
He did. But
Wow.
now that we have thoroughly mapped the internal psychology and the mental baseline of the architect,
It leaves us with the ultimate mechanical question, doesn't it?
it does. What actually happens when a mind forged in that specific crucible turns its attention to building the step-by-step framework of a $1 million presentation? Well, that is what we will explore next time. What if I told you that bombing a high-stakes sales pitch to a live audience, like getting absolute agonizing pin-drop silence when you finally reveal the price of your product, is actually the fastest, most reliable way to make $100,000.
I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive.
Right. Think about that for a second. Today, we are going to explore why the very thing you probably fear most in business, which
Yeah.
is, public rejection, might actually be the greatest asset you could possibly ask for.
Yeah, and in this deep dive, we're really unpacking the core architecture of a $1 million webinar. We're pulling this directly from Jason Fladlien's framework.
Which is just a masterclass in persuasion.
Absolutely. You are about to learn the 4 essential building blocks of a presentation that actually converts viewers into buyers. And more importantly, we're going to look at why ditching your perfectionism and just getting your messy, unpolished ideas in front of a real audience is the ultimate secret weapon.
Whether you're trying to build a business, advance your career, or even just convince someone else to buy into your ideas.
Yep.
Okay, I am genuinely so excited to get into this with you
Yeah.
because we are tackling something that I think paralyzes almost everybody.
Oh, for sure. Public speaking and selling.
Right. We are looking at a framework that takes something inherently terrifying, that abstract, highly vulnerable, sweaty palms art of selling your ideas to a crowd. And it turns it into a concrete, fixable science.
Which is such a relief, honestly.
It really is. Usually when people think about giving a sales presentation or, running a webinar or even just pitching a new initiative to their boss, it feels like this mystical act of spontaneous charisma.
Like you have to be Tony Robbins or Steve Jobs.
Exactly. You either have that magic touch or you don't. You get up there, you tap dance, you try to be charming, you hope people like you, and you basically just pray they say yes.
But what Jason has built here completely shatters that myth. It's
Yeah.
not about magic at all. It is about a very specific, almost mechanical structure.
And that structure is what we're breaking down today.
Right. It is entirely structural, which I think is the most empowering part of this entire concept.
Mm.
What Jason does is break down the anatomy of what we can basically call a conversion machine.
A conversion machine. I love that phrasing.
It's accurate, too. This framework is divided into exactly 4 distinct sections. You have the introduction, the content, the transition, and the close.
Intro, content, transition, close.
If you can wrap your head around how these 4 specific silos operate, life in the business world, or really any arena where you need to persuade people, becomes infinitely easier to navigate.
Because you're not just guessing anymore.
Exactly. You are no longer relying on a continuous, overwhelming, exhausting stream of persuasion where you just hope your energy holds up for an hour.
Oh man, that is the worst feeling. Just talking and hoping it's landing.
Right. Instead, you are building a machine. You are assembling 4 specific moving parts, and each one has an incredibly targeted, designated function.
I want to spend some real time on these 4 parts because it sounds almost too simple on the surface. Intro, content, transition, close. I mean, everyone who has ever taken a public speaking 101 class thinks they know what those words mean.
They think it just means beginning, middle, and end.
Right. But as we dig into what each part actually does in this specific framework, the genius of it really starts to emerge. Let's walk through them, starting with the introduction.
Okay, let's do it.
Now, conventionally, an introduction is just saying hello, giving your name, maybe reading a brief bio about where you went to school.
Which is incredibly boring.
Right. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
But the goal here is wildly different. The goal is to aggressively hook the audience and establish your absolute authority as the person holding the exact solution to their problems.
You have to cement the reality that you are the expert they need to be listening to right in this very second.
But, and here's the part I always struggle with, how do you actually do that without just sounding, totally arrogant?
That is the $1 million question, honestly. Establishing authority is not about listing your accolades or reading your resume. Like we just said, audiences tune out resumes.
Completely.
Authority, in this context, is established through empathy and deep understanding.
Empathy. Okay, explain that a bit more.
So if you can articulate the audience's problem better than they can articulate it themselves, they will automatically, subconsciously assume that you also possess the solution.
Wow, wait, that is huge. If you describe their pain perfectly, they assume you have the cure.
Exactly. So a successful introduction in this framework involves grabbing their attention with a hook that speaks directly to their most pressing pain point, and then proving that you deeply understand the mechanics of that pain.
You're building a foundation of trust.
You have to, because without that bedrock of trust, the rest of the presentation is just noise. They won't believe the content, and they certainly won't buy the pitch.
That makes so much sense. I mean, if someone comes to me and says, I know exactly why your lower back hurts when you wake up. It's because of this specific spinal compression to the L4 vertebrae. I trust them immediately, regardless of where they went to medical school.
Right, because they just prove they understand your reality.
Yes. And once that authority is locked in, the dynamic shifts. The audience is actually leaning forward, ready to listen. Which I guess moves us right into the second phase, the content.
The content section, this is where things get really interesting.
And this is where I see so many people, including myself in the past, get it completely wrong. The natural instinct is to think the content section is just an information dump.
Right, like a college lecture.
Exactly. You want to prove you're smart, so you just give away a massive amount of free information, tips, and tricks. But Jason's framework argues that the content section has to do two very specific things simultaneously.
Yes, it has a dual purpose.
It has to demonstrate that you can provide the solution, but it must also foster commitment from the audience to actually do what is necessary. You aren't just teaching them facts, right?
No, you are forcing a shift in their perspective. And that difference, the difference between teaching and shifting perspective, is the difference between a presentation that gets polite applause and a presentation that generates revenue.
The polite applause is the worst. Great job, very informative, and then nobody buys.
Because think about the standard webinar or seminar. The presenter gives a list of like 10 great tips. The audience takes copious notes. They feel very productive. They say, wow, that was great information. And then they go back to their normal lives and change absolutely nothing.
Yeah. We've all done that as attendees too.
Why does that happen? Because information without commitment is useless. The framework demands that your content actively dismantles the audience's false beliefs and replaces them with a new methodology, your methodology.
You have to get them to mentally agree with the steps you are laying out.
You do.
Can you give me an example of what that actually sounds like in practice? Like, how do you get someone to commit while you're just talking at them through a screen?
Sure. Let's say you are selling a high-end fitness coaching program.
Okay, classic example.
Right. Now, a standard ineffective content section would just explain how metabolism works and, I don't know, list 5 healthy foods to eat.
Eat more broccoli, drink more water.
Exactly. It's educational, sure, but it requires nothing from the listener. A framework-driven content section, however, would challenge the listener.
How so?
You might explain why traditional calorie-counting diets are physiologically designed to fail, and then introduce a new concept, perhaps focusing on hormonal balance instead.
Okay, so you're breaking down their old belief that calories are all that matter.
Exactly. And then you ask for a micro-commitment. You say to the audience, can you see how relying on sheer willpower against your own hormones is a losing battle? Type yes in the chat if you've ever felt that frustration.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you are making them physically and mentally acknowledge the flaw in their current approach.
You are. And by doing that, they aren't just passively receiving information, they're actively agreeing that your specific worldview is the correct one.
They are committing to the idea that your methodology is the path forward.
Yes, you are effectively walking them down a path where the only logical conclusion is the solution you are about to offer.
Which brings us directly to the third part. And honestly, this is where the wheels fall off for like 90% of people. The transition.
The dreaded transition.
It really is. You've hooked them, you've established your authority, you've delivered this paradigm-shifting content that has them nodding along in agreement. And now you have to pivot from the free, helpful teaching into asking for their credit card.
It's where the anxiety spikes.
Huge spike. This is where most presenters suddenly drop their voice an octave. They start sweating, they start talking incredibly fast, and the audience immediately feels the vibe shift. It just feels gross.
It feels jarring because most people treat the transition as an apology. Yeah, they feel guilty for asking for money after giving away free content. They feel like they're breaking some sort of unwritten rule of hospitality.
Wow, that is exactly what it feels like.
But in this architecture, the transition is arguably the most psychologically delicate yet crucial moment in the entire machine. Its purpose isn't to apologize.
What is it then?
Its purpose is to logically bridge the gap between what they just learned and the paid solution you offer. You have to prove to them that investing in your offer gives them a significantly greater chance of success while drastically diminishing the challenges they would inevitably face if they tried to implement your new methodology all by themselves.
So it's the bridge. You are basically saying, look, we both agree this is the path you need to take. You can absolutely walk this path alone. It will take you 5 years. You'll make a ton of mistakes, and it will be incredibly frustrating. Or
I have a vehicle that will drive you down this path in 6 months. Let's talk about the vehicle.
that is a brilliant way to frame it. You're shifting the focus from what to do, which you just taught them, to how to do it faster and easier.
You are diminishing the challenge of implementation. If you do this correctly, the audience doesn't feel like they're being pitched at all. They feel like they're being offered a lifeline.
And once you cross that bridge smoothly, without apologizing, you arrive at the fourth and final part, the close.
They're close.
This is where you actually lay out the mechanics of the offer, the modules, the bonuses, the price. And the core objective here, according to Jason, is simple but absolutely critical. You must empirically prove that the offer is worth far more than the money required to get it.
The perceived value must massively exceed the actual price.
Right, so it's introduction, content, transition, close. 4 distinct parts.
And the reason breaking the process into these 4 silos is so vital and why we are spending so much time dissecting them up front is that it allows a presenter to systematize their entire approach.
It makes it manageable.
Completely. When you have these 4 distinct separated sections, you can assign a specific, measurable goal to every single minute of your presentation.
It completely removes the guesswork that plagues most communicators.
Exactly. You never have to stand back and wonder, am I being persuasive enough right now? That's too abstract.
Right. How do you even measure persuasive enough?
You can't. Instead, you look at your script and ask binary questions. Does this specific paragraph in my introduction establish authority, yes or no?
Does this slide in my transition clearly connect the learning to the paid solution? Yes or no?
Exactly. It takes all the messy emotion out of it and replaces it with metrics and mechanics.
I love that so much. And when you step back and look at the whole sequence, you really start to realize how each section emotionally tees up the exact psychological state needed for the next one. It's literally a domino effect.
It is a perfectly engineered sequence.
Yeah. You cannot successfully transition to a pitch if you haven't fostered deep, active commitment during the content section. Like, why would they buy the shortcut if they don't even believe in the destination?
They wouldn't.
And you definitely can't teach the content effectively and get them to commit if you haven't firmly established your authority in the introduction. If you skip a step, or if one gear in the machine is broken, the whole thing grinds to a halt.
That sequential emotional buildup is the invisible engine of the entire process. The audience must be walked through a very specific psychological journey.
They need to trust you before they're willing to learn from you.
Right. They need to commit to the learning before they can see the inherent value of a paid shortcut.
And they absolutely need to clearly see the immense value of that shortcut before they will ever consider looking at the price tag.
Exactly. You know, thinking about this rigid 4-part structure, there's a great way to visualize this.
Oh.
Yeah, building a webinar or a pitch this way is exactly like designing a high-end Michelin star restaurant experience.
Oh, I like this. Walk me through it.
Okay, think about it from the moment you arrive at a fancy restaurant. The introduction is the curb appeal of the restaurant and the maitre d' greeting you at the door.
Setting the stage.
Right. It establishes the ambiance, the exclusivity, and most importantly, the trust. You walk in, you see the pristine decor, you meet the incredibly professional staff, and instantly your brain says, okay, these people know exactly what they're doing. I am in good hands.
You trust this place before you even sit down.
Exactly. That is establishing authority before you've even seen a menu. The environment, the posture of the staff, it all dictates the perception of the value before a single bite of food is ever tasted.
Because if the maitre d' is rude or, the lobby smells funny, your authority is gone.
The authority is completely gone and the diner is already skeptical of the food.
Right. So then we move to the content. The content is the main course.
Yes. This is where the chef delivers actual, tangible value and satisfaction. They demonstrate their skill on the plate, and you, as the diner, are savoring it.
But a great meal also does exactly what Jason says the content should do. It fosters commitment. You are enjoying the steak so much that you're committing to the entire dining experience.
You are relaxed. You are actively participating in the joy of the meal. You are trusting the chef's vision for the evening.
And following that logic, the transition phase would be the dessert menu being handed out.
That is a perfect parallel. The dessert menu is the perfect transition. Think about how a great waiter handles this.
They don't just abruptly clear your half-eaten steak, throw a chocolate cake on the table, and demand $50.
No, that would be jarring and, frankly, offensive.
It would ruin the whole night.
Instead, they come over, they smoothly clear the plates, they ask how much you enjoyed the main course, getting that micro-commitment, and then they seamlessly bridge the gap.
Since you enjoyed the rich flavors of the ribeye, our pastry chef has prepared a dark chocolate torte that pairs perfectly with it.
Exactly. They transition the experience from the savory main course to the possibility of something even more delightful. They diminish the challenge of choosing by making brilliant, logical recommendations based on what you just experienced.
Which leaves the close as the final presentation of the bill.
Yes. The close is the little black leather binder with the check inside.
Now, if the meal was terrible, that binder is a source of anger. You're scrutinizing every line item.
Oh, absolutely. Why did they charge me for extra bread?
Right. But because the introduction was so welcoming and established trust, because the content, the main course, was so deeply satisfying.
And because the transition, the dessert suggestion, was so seamless and logical.
When the patron opens that leather binder, they happily pay. In fact, they might even leave a massive 30% tip because the perceived value of the entire evening vastly exceeded the numerical cost printed on the receipt.
It is a brilliant analogy because it really highlights the absolute necessity of the sequence. Every piece must fulfill its specific role in the exact right order.
If you mess up the sequence, the experience is ruined.
Totally ruined. If the waiter abruptly throws the bill on the table while you are still eating your steak, which is essentially a failed transition, pitching before the content is fully digested, the patron feels rushed.
Processed and disrespected. The trust is just destroyed.
Exactly.
But let me push back on this for a second,
Go for it.
because I think a lot of people listening might have the same hesitation I do right now. If we are rigidly systematizing this entire process, like specifically engineering a transition and a close that are designed to extract a purchase from the audience, isn't this really just a glorified late-night infomercial?
That's a very common concern.
Right. How do we prevent the audience from feeling like they're just being processed through a machine, like cattle on a conveyor belt?
Yeah.
No one wants to sit through a presentation feeling like they're just the target of a rigid sales formula.
It's a very valid and frankly very important concern to address because the line between a high-value, life-changing presentation and a sleazy, manipulative infomercial can seem incredibly thin from the outside.
It really can.
But the difference, the massive dividing line, comes down entirely to the role and the execution of the content section.
The main course.
Right. Think about a late-night infomercial. What do they actually do? They scream features and benefits at you.
But wait, there's more.
Exactly. They show you black and white footage of someone struggling to use a normal mop and then full-color footage of their magic mop. It is 100% pitch, zero actual education.
Okay, that's true.
But a successful presentation built on Jason's framework must genuinely demonstrate the solution by providing real, actionable education.
So you were saying you actually had to teach them something fundamentally useful, something that improves their life, whether they end up buying your product or not.
That is the core of it. Jason is very clear on this. Education for education's sake doesn't cut it, because that doesn't lead to action. But zero substance doesn't cut it either, because that's just a scam.
It has to be that perfect middle ground.
The content must require intellectual and emotional commitment from the listener. You are giving them a step-by-step process. You are changing their perspective on their own problems, and you are asking them to mentally engage with a new reality.
And that transforms the dynamic.
It takes it from a one-sided, aggressive pitch into a mutual partnership of discovery. If the audience member feels their own perspective shifting, if they feel their knowledge genuinely growing during those 40 minutes of content, they do not feel processed.
They feel empowered.
Exactly. The infomercial processes you to extract money. The effective webinar empowers you with knowledge so you can make a fully informed decision about whether you want to invest in the shortcut.
Okay, that distinction makes a lot of sense. It's the difference between, shouting at someone through a television screen to buy an expensive blender versus inviting someone into your actual kitchen.
Oh, I like this.
Right. You teach them the nutritional science of a perfectly balanced smoothie. You show them how to prep the ingredients. You make one together. And then you say, hey, if you want to do this every morning without the hassle, I sell the blender we just used.
That's it, exactly. The value is in the demonstration and the shared educational experience. The product is just a tool to help them implement what you just taught them for free.
That feels so much better than just pitching.
It's the exact mechanism at play. And once you understand that the goal is empowerment through this four-part structure, it brings us to one of the most counterintuitive, mind-bending, and frankly, brilliant insights in the entire framework.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
The illusion of chronology.
Yes. Oh, this part absolutely blew my mind when I was reading through the notes.
It changes everything.
Here is where the framework gets incredibly practical and really interesting for anyone listening who has ever sat at a desk, stared at a blank screen, and felt that crushing wave of anxiety trying to write a presentation from scratch.
The blank page syndrome.
Exactly. We just spent 20 minutes outlining this perfect, logical, chronological sequence, right? Intro, content, transition, close.
Right.
And when you deliver the presentation, you will absolutely present it in that exact order. But Jason emphatically states that you should almost never, ever create the presentation in that order.
It is a massive paradigm shift for most creators. As humans, as storytellers, as presenters, we are deeply conditioned to start at the beginning. We think, I need to write page 1 before I can write page 2.
It just feels like common sense.
But the framework dictates that the presentation order and the creation order are two entirely separate concepts. In fact, the introduction, the very first thing the audience sees, is usually the absolute last section you should write.
The last thing. The thing that determines if they stay or leave is the thing you write last.
I know it sounds crazy.
At first glance, that sounds like a recipe for a disjointed mess. If I don't know where I'm starting, how do I start?
But the logic behind it is incredibly grounded once you hear it. You cannot accurately introduce a journey that hasn't been mapped out yet.
Because things change as you write.
Exactly. How can you confidently stand on stage and tell an audience exactly what they are going to learn today, what epiphanies they are going to have, and what the ultimate payoff will be if you haven't even finalized the lessons yourself?
It's a profound point that exposes the flaw in how most people work. Think about what happens when you write the introduction first. You are essentially making promises based on a hopeful guess.
You are.
You are sitting at your computer guessing what the content will eventually look like, guessing what the emotional tone of the transition will be, guessing how the final pitch will logically flow.
And inevitably, as you write the rest of the presentation, things change. The content evolves.
But you rarely go back and perfectly align the introduction to match the new content.
Almost never. So the audience gets an introduction that promises one thing, and a presentation that delivers something slightly different. It creates subconscious friction.
Like false advertising.
Kind of, yeah. But if you write the introduction last, after the content, the transition, and the close are fully fleshed out and locked in, you are operating from a place of absolute, unshakable certainty.
You know exactly what journey you are taking them on because you have already paved the road.
Exactly. And this ties perfectly into something called open loops.
Okay, let's talk about the concept of open loops, because this comes up a lot in this kind of copywriting and presentation design, and I want to make sure everyone listening understands it.
It's a vital concept.
An open loop, as I understand it, is essentially a psychological cliffhanger. It's when you tease a piece of information or start a story, but you intentionally withhold the conclusion until later in the presentation to keep the audience hooked.
Right.
Like a TV show cutting to commercial, right as the detective opens the mysterious vault. Is that right?
That is a perfect definition. The human brain hates incomplete information. It is a psychological principle known as the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect.
Yeah, we remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed ones. When you create an open loop, you are creating a cognitive itch that the audience absolutely has to scratch by staying until the end of the presentation.
Right. And here is where writing the introduction last becomes an absolute superpower.
Oh, absolutely.
If you try to write open loops into your introduction before you've written the content, you are just guessing at what might be interesting. You might tease something that ends up getting cut from the final draft.
Which is a disaster.
But if you write the introduction last, you look at your finished content and say, oh, slide 42 has this incredible, surprising statistic about weight loss. I am going to tease that exact statistic in the first 2 minutes.
You can meticulously engineer these open loops in the introduction that perfectly, seamlessly resolve an hour later in the content or the close.
It allows for an incredibly tight, cohesive experience. Every word in the introduction becomes purposeful.
So, if you accept that you shouldn't start at the beginning, the obvious question is, where do you start?
Right. I'm staring at a blank screen. What do I do?
The framework provides two strategic options for where to begin the creation process, and they are based on two distinct internal states of the creator: excitement and ease. You start your blank document by writing either the content section or the close section.
Okay, let's dive into excitement first. Jason suggests that you should look at your outline and simply start writing the section that you are personally most jazzed about in that exact moment.
Yes.
If there's a specific case study in the content that you love, Just start writing that. Why is excitement the driving metric here?
Because we have to remember that people ultimately buy on emotion, even if they justify it with logic later. Emotion is the true currency of persuasion.
That is so true.
If a creator forces themselves to start with a dry, biographical introductory slide just because it's chronologically first, they drain their own creative energy. They get bored.
And if you are bored while creating the material,
That boredom will subconsciously weave its way into the text, the slides, and eventually your vocal delivery. You'll sound bored giving the presentation.
which is the death knell for a webinar.
Absolutely. But if you start with the section that genuinely excites you, you infuse the presentation with your own raw passion during the initial drafting phase. That emotion becomes permanently baked into the material. It becomes contagious.
I absolutely love the idea of capturing lightning in a bottle. It's so relatable. Think about the listener right now preparing a Q3 review for their department or trying to write a thesis paper.
It's awful.
The absolute hardest part, the part that causes the most procrastination and agony, is staring at that blinking cursor, trying to write the perfect opening hook. It is paralyzing.
It really is.
This framework basically gives you permission to cheat. It gives you permission to skip the terrifying blank page and start right in the middle where the fire's already burning.
Yes.
You know your product is cool, so start writing about the product. You know a great actionable tip, start there. You just ride that wave of enthusiasm and suddenly you have momentum. Writer's block is essentially eliminated.
It aligns the creation process with the natural flow of human energy rather than forcing it into a rigid chronological box that usually just stifles creativity.
But, as we all know, there are days when you sit down to work and the excitement simply isn't there.
Sure, you're tired, you're stressed.
What if the content you need to teach is complex, you're feeling overwhelmed, and you just don't have that spark of passion that day?
That is exactly where the second factor comes in, ease.
Right. And Jason's advice here is fascinating. He says, if your content is unclear or you feel stuck, start with the pitch. Start with the close.
Write out the final offer first, just to get moving.
From a strategic planning perspective, starting with the pitch when you are stuck makes perfect, undeniable sense. It's the ultimate exercise in reverse engineering.
It really is.
Think about it. The close is the ultimate destination of the entire presentation. It contains the price, the specific deliverables, the bonuses, the guarantee.
If you force yourself to clearly define that ultimate destination first, it often automatically reverse engineers the path needed to get there.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this.
Yep.
Let's say I'm building a presentation to sell a $2,000 online course on how to master search engine optimization, SEO.
Okay.
If I'm stuck on what to teach in the middle, Jason is saying I should literally write out the final sales slides first. Here's the course, it costs $2,000, here are the modules. How does that actually help me write the content?
Because once you clearly define the destination, a $2,000 SEO course, you can ask yourself a very pragmatic question.
Which is?
What specific beliefs must my audience hold to make a $2,000 investment in SEO seem not just logical, but absolutely necessary? Oh, wow.
Suddenly, your content section writes itself. You realize, okay, my content needs to prove that relying on social media algorithms is dangerous and that owning your search traffic is the only way to build a sustainable business.
That makes total sense.
You only know to teach that specific concept because you clearly defined what you were selling first. If you just started writing content blindly, you might teach them how to write catchy headlines.
Which is helpful.
But it doesn't naturally lead to a $2,000 course on technical SEO.
Yeah.
Defining the close creates the boundaries for the content.
That is incredibly powerful. You are essentially building the bridge from the destination backwards to the starting point.
Exactly.
But I have to admit, I still have a lingering discomfort about this. I understand starting with the easiest part, or the pitch, to get the ball rolling and build momentum. But earlier, we agreed very strongly that the introduction is the foundation of trust.
We did. It establishes the authority. If we leave the introduction for the very last step, aren't we treating the absolute most critical first impression as an afterthought? Aren't we risking slapping together a sloppy greeting just because we are exhausted and eager to finish the project?
I'm glad you brought that up because it highlights a common misconception about the writing process. It requires us to completely reframe what writing it last actually means.
Okay, reframe it for me.
Writing the introduction last does not mean treating it as an afterthought. It means the introduction is finally fully informed. I want you to think of the introduction not as a simple greeting, but as a perfectly calibrated map of a newly discovered territory.
A perfectly calibrated map. Okay, I'm listening.
You cannot draw an accurate map of a territory you haven't explored yet. If you try, you are just drawing mythical dragons in the corners.
Right, here be dragons.
Exactly. When you write the introduction last, every single word you choose, every promise you make to the audience, every claim of authority you state is backed by the absolute reality of the content and the close you have already painstakingly crafted.
So it's the most honest part of the presentation.
Yes. An introduction written first is, at best, a hopeful guess. An introduction written last is a precise, powerful, undeniably accurate index of the exact journey you are about to take them on. It's actually treating the first impression with the ultimate respect by ensuring you never overpromise and underdeliver.
That completely shifts my perspective.
Yeah.
You aren't neglecting the foundation. You are simply waiting until you have all the necessary architectural blueprints to pour the concrete properly.
Exactly.
That is brilliant. And this whole philosophy, avoiding the trap of chronological perfectionism, getting the engine built first, leads us directly into the third major concept of this framework.
Which might be the most challenging one for type A personalities to accept.
Oh, absolutely. The shippable philosophy and the 80-20 rule.
This is where Jason's framework transitions from elegant theory into hard, sometimes uncomfortable, practical reality.
It really does.
The entire system relies heavily on the Pareto principle, commonly known as the 80-20 rule. The idea that roughly 20% of your initial effort will yield 80% of your final results.
And Jason drops a pretty heavy truth bomb regarding this in the framework. He says that if your core offer, your pitch, cannot work and convert at that 80% level of effort, you are doomed regardless.
It's true.
No amount of tweaking, polishing, and perfecting the font choices on your slides is going to save a fundamentally flawed offer.
It's a harsh reality, but an absolutely necessary one for any entrepreneur or creator to grasp. The framework dictates that webinars, pitches, and really any major business presentation must be built and deployed in stages.
And the very first and most crucial stage is simply getting the presentation to a state of being shippable.
Shippable, I love that word.
Me too. Meaning it is just decent enough to be put in front of a real live audience. It is absolutely not perfect. It might even be a little rough around the edges.
You might stumble over a word, the graphics might be basic.
But the core mechanics exist in the real world.
Think about the strategy Jason advises for when you are up against a tight deadline, which is almost always the case in business. He says you must focus heavily on securing the pitch and the content sections, and spend significantly less time worrying about polishing the introduction and the transition.
You build the core engine of the presentation first.
Exactly. Why? Because real optimization, true, meaningful improvement of your presentation only ever occurs after it is put in front of real people who possess the capacity to spend real money.
I love how beautifully blunt that is. You could practice your pitch in the mirror 100 times. You can show your slide deck to your colleagues. You can ask your mom what she thinks of your brilliant ideas.
And they'll all tell you it's great.
Right. But until someone is actually forced to make a decision to reach for their credit card, you are just playing make-believe.
They're in a vacuum.
Let me use an analogy that I think perfectly captures this reality. In the tech world, in software development, they have this foundational concept called the MVP, the minimum viable product.
A highly relevant comparison. The MVP is the cornerstone of modern innovation.
Exactly. When a tech company decides to build a revolutionary new app, they do not spend 3 years in a dark basement perfecting the fonts, the background colors, and the subtle animations before anyone sees it.
If they do, a competitor beats them to market.
Precisely. Instead, they build the core functionality, the engine that actually solves the user's problem, and they release a beta version, an MVP, into the wild to see if people actually use it.
A shippable webinar is your beta test.
Yes, the content and the pitch are your core code. If the core code crashes, if your offer is fundamentally weak, or your teaching is totally confusing to the audience, it absolutely does not matter how beautiful your introduction was or how smooth your transition felt.
It's lipstick on a pig.
Right. You do not polish the user interface, the intro and the transition, until you know the core engine actually runs when real users take it for a spin.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. The danger of perfectionism in business cannot be overstated. It is a silent killer of ideas.
It really is.
I see so many talented entrepreneurs and corporate leaders who retreat into a vacuum. They spend 6 months meticulously tweaking slide transitions, adjusting graphics, obsessing over the exact phrasing of a single sentence in the introduction.
All while being completely insulated from actual brutal market feedback.
Exactly. Perfectionism is often just a defense mechanism against rejection.
I'll say that again.
Perfectionism is a defense mechanism against rejection. If it's never finished, you never have to launch it, and if you never launch it, nobody can tell you it's a bad idea.
Wow, that hits close to home.
Jason's framework demands vulnerability. It forces you to take a deep breath, accept that it isn't perfect, and put a good enough product out into the wild.
But I want to dig into this idea of real money being the only valid metric for feedback, because it sounds a bit, I don't know, cynical.
Sure.
Surely presenting your ideas to a group of trusted peers or a mastermind group and getting their constructive criticism is valuable, right? They could tell you if the flow makes sense.
It might be valuable for your ego and it might fix a few typos, but it is dangerously misleading for your business strategy.
How so?
You have to understand human nature. When you present to peers, or when an audience is asked for feedback but not asked to make a financial decision, they will almost always default to politeness.
They don't want to hurt your feelings.
Exactly. They will tell you, wow, great information, or I really loved the design of your slides. But praise does not equal validation of the offer. Politeness is not a substitute for purchase intent.
Right, it's the classic mom test. People will lie to your face to protect your feelings.
Exactly. But a credit card transaction is an undeniable, objective truth. An audience's wallets tell the unvarnished reality about whether your content actually fostered real commitment and whether your close demonstrated sufficient value.
The wallet doesn't lie.
Never. If they praise the presentation to the heavens in the chat box, but not a single person buys, your presentation failed its primary objective.
Yep.
Period. Real money is the only feedback loop that guarantees ecological truth.
It proves whether the value you believe you are offering actually matches the value the market perceives.
Precisely.
Okay, I hear that. And from a cold, hard business perspective, it makes total sense. But I have to ask you a serious question about the ethics, or at least the respectfulness, of this approach.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's say you are running a live webinar. You are asking an audience to give you an hour of their precious time, and eventually, you are asking them to hand over their hard-earned money, maybe hundreds or thousands of dollars.
Right.
Isn't it profoundly disrespectful to present them with a shippable, rough-around-the-edges beta version of your presentation? Shouldn't a professional presentation be 100% polished out of simple respect for the person buying?
That is a very thoughtful pushback, but it stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of what is actually being tested when we talk about a shippable webinar.
Okay, help me understand.
You have to intellectually separate the core offer from the packaging.
Offer versus packaging. Okay.
The value of the core offer, the actual product, the coaching service, the software you are delivering to the buyer after they pay, must always be at 100%.
So the product itself isn't a beta?
No, absolutely not. You never shortchange the customer on the actual solution. Your integrity must be absolute on the deliverable, but the webinar itself, the slides, the pacing, the exact phrasing of the transition, that is just the packaging. That is the marketing vehicle used to explain the offer.
Or I see the distinction now. The product they are buying is perfect and ready, but the commercial explaining it is what's in beta testing.
Precisely. And let's look at this from a different angle regarding respect for the audience.
Okay.
Consider this. If your core offer is truly valuable, if it possesses the genuine power to solve a painful, lingering problem for your audience, then delaying its release for 6 months due to your own slide deck perfectionism is the truly disrespectful act.
Oh, wow.
Your vanity regarding the presentation is actively depriving the audience of the solution they desperately need right now.
I never thought of it that way.
Let's say you have a program that genuinely helps small businesses avoid bankruptcy. Withholding that program because you want to spend another month finding the perfect stock photos for your intro is a disservice to the people going out of business.
A shippable webinar delivers the solution to the people who need it faster.
Exactly. Framing perfectionism as a form of selfishness.
That is a massive perspective shift. You are essentially withholding the cure because you don't like the color of the bottle you're putting it in.
That's a great way to put it.
Getting it out there, even if it's an 80% perfect presentation, does infinitely more good in the world than a 100% perfect presentation that lives forever on your hard drive, unseen by anyone.
It requires a shift from ego-centric creation to audience-centric delivery. And that willingness to launch an imperfect presentation, to stand naked in front of the market and face the reality of their feedback, brings us to the most compelling and, frankly, dramatic part of this entire framework.
Oh yes, the autopsy of a failure.
This is where the true power of systematizing your approach as a four-part machine is finally revealed in all its glory.
This story from Jason's career is wild.
Yeah.
It is the ultimate entrepreneur nightmare scenario, the thing that keeps people awake at night.
It's brutal.
The framework text details a specific event where Jason and his partner, Wilson Matos, decided to launch a webinar for a software product they created called WP Twin.
Right.
Now, for the listener who might not be a developer, back in the day, migrating or cloning a WordPress website from one server to another was an absolute nightmare.
It was incredibly tedious.
It took hours, it was incredibly technical, and sites crashed all the time. WP Twin was a piece of software that solved this massive pain point with a few clicks. It was a great product.
A phenomenal product.
So they do all the work. They build the webinar, they get a huge live audience to show up, they deliver the content, they build up the value, the audience seems engaged.
Yeah.
And then they drop the price. They make the pitch.
And what happens?
Total, absolute, soul-crushing silence.
Crickets in the chat box.
Crickets. Not a single buyer. It bombed horribly.
It is the defining moment. Every presenter, every salesperson, every entrepreneur dreads deep in their bones a complete, undeniable, and highly public rejection.
It hurts just thinking about it.
When you have poured your heart into a project and the market responds with silence, the psychological devastation is immense. Most people, faced with that level of catastrophic failure on a live stage, would fold completely.
I would want to crawl under my desk.
They would abandon the project, they would blame the software for being too niche, they would blame the audience for being cheap, and they would walk away in shame, probably never hosting a webinar again.
But Jason and Wilson didn't do that.
No, they didn't. Because they were operating within this rigid four-part framework, they were able to miraculously remove their fragile human egos from the equation.
Instead of panicking and throwing a pity party, they used the framework to literally run a clinical autopsy on the failure. They looked at the machine they built to see which specific part broke.
And what they found when they looked at the data instead of their feelings was incredible.
It wasn't that the whole presentation was garbage. They found one tiny specific section where the logic broke down and they lost the audience's commitment.
This is the undeniable genius of isolating variables in a system. They didn't assume the WP Twin product was worthless, and they didn't assume the audience was broke.
Right.
They realized that because the presentation was a machine made of 4 distinct parts, they didn't need to scrap the machine. They only needed to find the broken gear.
They looked at the chat logs, they looked at the drop-off rates, and they pinpointed exactly where the audience got confused.
They spent just a few hours fixing that one specific section, recalibrating the logic where the audience got lost during the transition.
And here is the part of the story that requires absolute nerves of steel.
This is the craziest part.
After fixing that one section, they didn't go buy a new email list or find a completely fresh audience to test it on. They went back and invited the exact same audience to attend another webinar just a few weeks later.
They faced the exact people who had just rejected them.
It requires immense emotional resilience to step back into the arena with the people who just gave you a thumbs down. But the result speaks for itself and validates the entire methodology.
Presenting the recalibrated, slightly tweaked webinar to the identical audience resulted in over $100,000 in sales before the webinar even finished.
That is insane.
And that massive influx of cash eventually allowed them to launch a multi-million-dollar software business that continued to generate revenue for years.
$100,000 from the exact same people who gave them dead silence a few weeks prior. Let me try to paint a vivid picture for the listener to really feel what this means in practice.
Okay, paint the picture.
Imagine you are standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people, or you're on a massive Zoom call with all the executives at your company. You make your grand pitch, you reveal the cost of your initiative, and nothing. The sweat immediately beads on your forehead, your stomach drops through the floor. The overwhelming, very human urge in that moment of silence is to panic. You want to immediately start backpedaling.
Oh, well, if that's too expensive, we can do it for half the price.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You want to offer a discount or apologize for wasting their time or just close your laptop and run away.
The urge to emotionally react to silence or negative market feedback in real time is the downfall of most inexperienced communicators. They break character, they show desperation, and they destroy whatever authority they had left.
Exactly. But instead of reacting like a panicked human being whose ego is bruised, the framework allows you to act like a dispassionate mechanic.
A mechanic, yes.
Imagine a mechanic plugging a high-end sports car into a diagnostic computer. The computer runs a scan and says, the engine block is fine, the transmission is perfect, but the spark plug in cylinder number 3 is misfiring.
The mechanic doesn't throw his hands up, curse the sky, and send the whole car to the junkyard.
And they certainly don't take the misfire as a personal insult to their skills. Oh, the car hates me.
Right, they just calmly walk over to the shelf, get a new spark plug, and replace it in cylinder 3.
That is exactly what Jason's framework does for a sales pitch or a presentation. It takes a devastating emotional rejection and turns it into a clinical, solvable math problem.
The concept of recalibration is the ultimate psychological safety net for a creator. Think about life without this framework.
It's terrifying.
If you just get up and wing it with a continuous stream of charisma and you fail, what is the takeaway? The takeaway is, I am not charismatic enough, or my entire idea is bad. Everything is broken and you have to start from scratch.
But with a structured framework, you can isolate the variables based on observed audience behavior.
Exactly. If everyone stays engaged on the webinar for the first 40 minutes, asking great questions, but they completely drop off the call the second you mention a paid offer, you have incredible diagnostic data.
You know, your intro and your content section worked beautifully, but your transition was jarring, unnatural, and failed to bridge the gap.
You don't need to rebuild the entire hour-long presentation. You just need to spend 2 hours rewriting the 5-minute transition to make it smoother.
It's so liberating. It completely removes the existential dread from the process of putting yourself out there. But I have to say, even understanding the mechanics of it, it still blows my mind that Jason and Wilson went back to the exact same audience.
It takes guts.
I am trying to put myself in their shoes.
Yeah.
If I bomb a pitch to a group of people, my natural instinct is to change my name, move to a different country, and never ever show my face to those specific human beings again.
You'd fake your own death.
Basically. I would be mortified. Why on earth did the audience give them a second chance? Why didn't the audience just see the email invitation and think, oh, it's those 2 guys who awkwardly tried to sell us that confusing software last month, delete?
Your reaction is incredibly common, and it touches on a deep, fundamental aspect of human psychology that is a crucial lesson for anyone trying to sell anything.
Okay, what is it?
We have a massive tendency to personalize rejection. When the audience didn't buy the WP Twin software the first time, Jason and Wilson could easily have assumed, the audience hates us, they think we are frauds.
Which is what we all do.
But the reality of consumer behavior is much less dramatic. The audience didn't reject the creators personally. They simply rejected a specific logical disconnect in the original presentation. They didn't buy because they didn't understand the value proposition at that specific moment.
So the audience was just confused, not malicious. They weren't sitting there judging Jason's soul. They were just staring at their screens thinking, wait, how does this software actually save me time?
Precisely. And here is the golden key to understanding this entire story. Once that specific logical disconnect was fixed in the second webinar, the audience's underlying pain point, the absolute nightmare of migrating WordPress websites manually, was still there.
The problem didn't go away.
The audience still had the agonizing problem that needed solving. They showed up the first time because they desperately wanted a solution to their pain. They showed up the second time, hoping that this time the solution would finally make logical sense to them.
The desire for the product doesn't magically vanish just because the presenter's first pitch was clumsy.
When the presentation finally aligned with their needs and clearly demonstrated the value, they bought instantly.
That is just incredible. It completely flips the script on how we view an audience or a prospect. We usually view them as adversaries we have to conquer.
But they aren't adversaries.
The audience is actually rooting for you. They want you to solve their problem. They want to give you their money or their approval if you can just make it make logical sense for them. They are sitting there hoping you have the magic key.
That completely changes how you view public speaking or pitching.
So looking at everything we've covered, the 4 parts, building out of order, shipping the MVP, and recalibrating failure, what does this all mean when we pull back and look at the whole picture? How do we synthesize this?
If there is one core unifying insight to take away from this deep dive into Jason Fladlien's framework, it's that a highly successful presentation, one that moves people to action and generates real results, is never a magical act of spontaneous charisma or luck.
It's a machine.
It is a living, breathing machine made of 4 distinct, purposeful parts: authority, commitment, diminished challenge, and exceeded value. By giving yourself the freedom to build this machine out of order based on your own passion, by having the courage to launch it into the real world before your perfectionism says it's ready,
And by using failure merely as objective diagnostic data to recalibrate rather than a reason to quit,
you completely remove the fear of selling. You replace paralyzing fear with reliable mechanics.
you are turning the terrifying art of persuasion into manageable engineering. You now know the 4 pieces of the puzzle, and you know exactly how to test them in the real world without letting your fragile ego get in the way of your success.
But as we wrap this up, it begs a massive lingering question. We talked about how the introduction is the perfectly calibrated map, the very last thing you create. But once you do finally sit down to write it, how exactly do you engineer a hook so powerful and establish authority so deeply that your audience becomes physically and psychologically incapable of clicking away in those first crucial minutes? Think on that, because that is exactly what we are going to unpack on the next deep dive.
So I want you to imagine that you have an uncle.
Okay.
And not just any uncle. We're talking about an uncle who is perpetually broke.
Right, the classic broke uncle.
Exactly. And he's been divorced like 3 or 4 times. Plus, he is wildly, unapologetically out of shape.
I can picture him perfectly.
Right. Now, imagine this exact uncle corners you at, say, a family Thanksgiving dinner. He sits you down, looks you dead in the eye, and tries to give you serious, earnest life advice.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, advice about, like, how to manage your 401k or how to communicate better with your spouse.
Unsolicited advice, of course.
Of course. But here's the catch. Even if his advice, objectively speaking, is 100% mathematically and psychologically accurate,
Okay.
even if it is exactly the advice you desperately need to hear in that exact moment, are you actually going to listen to him?
No, absolutely not.
Right. Are you going to go home and execute his financial plan? Probably not.
Definitely not. You're going to nod politely, excuse yourself to get some pie,
Right.
and completely ignore everything he just said.
Exactly. And why is that? It's because he completely lacks congruency.
Yeah, it's the ultimate communication paradox. And honestly, it captures the absolute core tension of what happens every time someone stands up to give a presentation.
It really does.
It isolates the single biggest mistake that leaders, salespeople, and, well, educators make. You can have the greatest information in the world.
Right.
You can have perfectly researched, peer-reviewed data that could genuinely change a person's life. But, and this is a massive but, if you have zero established authority in the eyes of the person listening, none of it matters.
It just washes right over them.
Exactly, because the human brain is a highly skeptical machine. If your audience does not buy into you first, they are never, ever going to buy into your message.
And that dynamic is exactly what we are dissecting for you today. Welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we are exploring the psychological architecture of a very specific concept. It's called An Introduction to the Introduction.
Such a great title.
Right. This framework comes directly from Jason Fladlien's approach to webinars. Specifically, it breaks down the mechanics of how you open a presentation.
But we should be clear. This isn't just about selling things on the internet, right?
Oh, absolutely not. Whether you are pitching a startup or leading a corporate all-hands meeting or just trying to convince a room full of people to listen to your ideas.
Yeah, the principles are universal.
Exactly. You are about to learn the psychological pillars of hooking an audience, establishing unshakable authority, and preemptively destroying every objection before you even start teaching your core material.
It is essentially a masterclass in cognitive framing. I mean, we're going to look at how to hijack the natural skepticism of an audience and literally rewire it into eager anticipation.
Which is so crucial because, honestly, the clock starts ticking the absolute second you open your mouth.
Oh, yeah. You don't have 20 minutes to warm people up with pleasantries anymore.
No, people will just check out.
Right. You have to meet the audience exactly where they are at mentally and then instantly position yourself as the foremost trustworthy authority in the room.
Because you can't just wait for your brilliant content to prove your worth.
Exactly. You have to prove your worth up front so that they actually consume your brilliant content through a lens of respect.
Let's test that, though. Because if the goal is to establish authority instantly, I feel like the natural instinct for most people is to just, list off their resume.
Oh, the dreaded resume dump.
Yeah, which usually puts an audience straight to sleep.
100%.
But the framework here takes a totally different approach. It breaks the fast track to authority down into very specific categories, and it starts with results.
Right, leading with undeniable proof.
Yeah, the idea is don't tell them you're good.
Yeah.
Show them undeniable visual proof. The example given in the text is a presentation opening where the speaker throws up a literal screenshot of an affiliate leaderboard.
I love this example.
It's wild. It shows his company in first place, having generated $9,894,008 in just 8 days.
Almost $10 million
Yeah.
in 8 days.
Yeah. And the second place company isn't even close. They're sitting at something like 1.9 million. So he beat the runner-up by nearly $8 million.
It's a staggering visual.
But I have to push back here, because if I'm sitting in an audience and a speaker opens by blasting a $10 million flex on a giant screen, my guard goes up.
For sure.
Like, doesn't leading with something so massive immediately alienate normal people? Doesn't it just sound incredibly arrogant?
Well, that is the exact fear that keeps most presenters playing small.
Yeah.
It's why people hide their results, or they qualify them with that kind of false modesty.
Right. The whole I was just lucky thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But let's look at the psychology of subjective boasting versus objective reality.
Okay.
If you stand on stage and say, I am a marketing genius, I am the best in the world, that is subjective. It's an
Yeah.
opinion.
And that triggers people.
Right. It triggers the audience's ego defense mechanisms. They immediately think, oh, really? Prove it.
Yeah, you're challenging them.
But a screenshot of a third-party leaderboard showing a comma-heavy number, that isn't an opinion. It is a sterile, factual artifact of reality.
So it solves your broke uncle problem instantly.
Instantly. The audience's brain processes that image and concludes, okay, I might not like this person yet, but whatever they are doing, it undeniably works. The sheer magnitude of the result forces their respect.
Okay, but factuality doesn't automatically negate arrogance, right? I mean, billionaires state factual numbers about their wealth all the time, and they are still often perceived as completely out of touch.
Or totally alienated from everyday reality, yeah.
Right, so there has to be another mechanism at play to keep the audience from just folding their arms and saying, good for you, but you're in a different stratosphere than me.
You're entirely right, which is why dropping a massive result in isolation is actually dangerous.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it creates awe, but it destroys rapport. It creates this massive chasm between you and the listener. That is why the immediate, non-negotiable next step in this psychological sequence is positioning.
Positioning. Okay, we're great.
The second you establish that you operate at a $10 million level,
Yeah.
you have to instantly soften the flex by showing them exactly how you got there. And you have to do it through the lens of vulnerability.
And the execution of that in the framework is fascinating to me, because the speaker doesn't follow up the $10 million slide with, like, a picture of a Ferrari or a mansion.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. Instead, the next slide is a mundane email receipt, a literal credit card receipt for $25,000 to join a mastermind group.
The Genius Network, I believe it was.
Yes, exactly. And then he shows another email where he is nervously volunteering to do a simple 10-minute presentation for that group. It completely shifts the dynamic.
It does. It's the classic hero's journey narrative applied to a business presentation.
Yeah.
We need to see Superman as clumsy Clark Kent before we can fully root for him. By showing the receipt and the nervous email, you are implicitly telling the audience, I am not some untouchable deity who was born with a silver spoon.
I'm just a normal guy.
Yeah, not that long ago, I was exactly where you're sitting right now. I had to painfully swipe my credit card to get into the right room. I was terrified to speak for 10 minutes.
So it bridges the gap.
Exactly. It takes the massive result and anchors it to a relatable human struggle.
Okay, so you've shown the result and you've humanized yourself with the origin story. But the framework doesn't stop there.
No, it aggressively stacks more proof.
Right, it moves right into celebrity. And this breaks down into 3 types, which I found really interesting. Global, local or industry, and manufactured.
Yeah, the celebrity aspect is huge.
So the visual example given for global celebrity is the speaker literally bear-hugging Shaquille O'Neal.
Check.
Shaq. Now, Shaq is a basketball legend, obviously, but he has absolutely nothing to do with digital marketing or webinars.
No, nothing at all.
So why does a picture with an NBA center make someone more credible at teaching business strategy? Like, logically, it makes 0 sense.
Logically, it makes 0 sense.
No?
But psychologically, it makes perfect sense.
How so?
This relies on a cognitive bias known as the halo effect, combined with how our brains use heuristics, mental shortcuts to conserve energy.
Because thinking is hard.
Exactly. The human brain is lazy. Evaluating a stranger's credibility from scratch requires a lot of caloric energy and critical thinking. So instead of doing the hard work, our brains look for social proof.
Ah, okay.
When an audience sees you physically connected to or endorsed by someone they already hold in high universal regard, like Shaq, their brain just takes a shortcut.
It just maps his status onto you?
Precisely. It says, well, Shaq is high status. Shaq seems to trust this guy enough to hug him. Therefore, this guy must also be high status. The authority transfers automatically, regardless of the actual context of the relationship.
Well, it's like authority by osmosis.
Exactly. And that's global celebrity. But you also need industry celebrity. The framework brings up Bob Proctor, who is a legend in the specific niche of self-help and personal development.
Right.
If you are speaking to an audience in that niche, a picture with Bob Proctor might actually carry more targeted weight than a picture with Shaq.
Because it's relevant to them.
Right. Shaq proves you're important in the world. Bob Proctor proves you're important in their world.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And then there's the fourth element to finalize this fast track to authority, testimonials.
But again, the framework is incredibly specific here.
Yeah, you don't just throw up a quote that says, great presentation, 5 stars. That's useless. It specifies 4 distinct types of testimonials you need to show.
Let's go through them.
So you have financial testimonials, which are just cold, hard number screenshots of client sales dashboards. But the one I found most compelling was the case study testimonial. Yes, Mario. The example is this guy named Mario, who is a full-time university administrator. He had a normal 9-to-5 job, and he ended up making over $100,000 in his first 5 weeks applying the methods.
And why do you think that specific example is so vital?
Because it addresses the avatar in the room who thinks, this only works for tech wizards or people with no day jobs. Mario is the everyman.
Exactly.
It proves the system works for a normal guy with a normal job.
Yes. It provides an identification anchor. Then you layer in lifestyle testimonials, showing a client working from a laptop on a beach, which appeals to the segment of the audience motivated purely by freedom.
Right. The digital nomad dream.
Exactly. And finally, inspirational testimonials, where someone talks about how the method literally saved their marriage or altered their life trajectory.
So if we synthesize this first phase, the takeaway for you listening is that you absolutely cannot rely on a single dimension of proof.
It's a huge mistake.
If you only show your massive financial results, you're an arrogant jerk. If you only show a picture with a celebrity, you're an insecure name-dropper.
Yeah.
If you only tell your vulnerable origin story, you're a nice person, but maybe not a high-level expert. You have to aggressively stack these different types of proof-objective results, relatable vulnerability, borrowed celebrity authority, and diverse client testimonials.
And you have to do it fast, within the first few minutes of opening your mouth.
Right. But here is where the dynamic shifts. Let's say you've executed that perfectly. You have stacked the proof. The audience looks at you and says, okay, this person is undeniably an expert. I respect them.
That is a massive victory.
It is, but it is entirely passive. Respecting you does not mean they're actually going to absorb what you teach next.
Right. Believing you and paying attention to you are two completely different things. Which brings us to the next critical question. How do you force a passive observer who is sitting back with their arms crossed to become an active, invested participant in your presentation?
To understand this, we need to look at a brilliant analogy the framework uses from the classic 1990s movie White Men Can't Jump.
Such a great movie.
Right. There's that scene with Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes. Woody Harrelson's character is sitting in the car, bopping his head to Purple Haze by Jimi Hendrix.
He thinks he's totally vibing with it.
Yeah, he's just grooving. And Wesley Snipes looks at him with total disdain and says, look, man, you can listen to Jimmy, but you can't hear him. There's a difference. Just because you're listening to him doesn't mean you're hearing him.
It is a profound distinction for anyone trying to communicate complex information. When you stand in front of a room or when you are hosting a virtual meeting, just because the audience has their eyes directed at your slides and their ears tuned to your audio frequency does not mean they are hearing you.
It's just background noise to them.
Exactly. It is just washing over them. To cross that bridge from listening to hearing, you have to secure physiological and psychological commitments from them.
So the framework breaks this down into soft commitments and mega commitments. And the soft commitments start hilariously early.
Yeah, we're talking during the basic audio sound check.
Right. Normally, a presenter gets on and says, hey, everyone, type 1 in the chat if you can hear me. It's boring. It's transactional.
And low effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the framework suggests saying something like, give me a yes in the chat, but do it without actually using the word yes. And suddenly people start typing things like, oh yeah, you bet, affirmative, absolutely.
It seems like a silly parlor trick, but look at what is happening neurologically. You are forcing kinesthetic engagement.
Oh, because they actually have to think about it.
Yes, you are making them process a simple rule, don't use the word yes, formulate a creative response, and physically engage their fingers on the keyboard. You are waking up their prefrontal cortex.
Oh, so smart.
You are training them in a very low-stakes environment that this is a two-way street.
Yeah.
When you ask a question, they are expected to respond.
Okay, the soft commitment makes sense. It warms up the room. But then the framework introduces the mega commitment.
And this is where things get heavy.
Very heavy. The presenter doesn't just ask them if they can hear the audio. The presenter asks the audience to make a definitive identity-level promise before any actual content is taught.
Right.
The specific script involves asking the audience to type yes in the chat to a statement like, I promise to see myself doing what you show me today.
Which is a huge ask.
It is. You are literally asking them to commit to visualizing their own success with a system they haven't even seen yet. Now, playing devil's advocate here, this feels incredibly forced to me.
I can see that.
Like, it feels like one of those motivational seminars where the speaker forces everyone to stand up, massage the shoulders of the stranger next to them, and scream, I am a champion.
Right. It feels a bit culty.
Exactly. Why do we need an intelligent adult audience to physically type the word yes to a promise like that?
Because if you don't secure that commitment, their past trauma will sabotage your presentation.
Past trauma. We're talking about a business presentation, not therapy.
In the context of learning, they are actually kind of the same thing.
Really? How so?
Think about the neurology of memory and anticipation. The human brain is a prediction machine. When an audience member is faced with a new opportunity, a new business model, a new software, a new diet, their brain immediately scans its historical database to predict what will happen next.
Okay.
And for most people, that database is full of failures. They think, I tried a side hustle 3 years ago and I lost money, or I bought a course last year and never finished it, or I'm just not a technical person.
So they have all this baggage.
Yes, their default state is an expectation of future failure based on past friction.
So they are sitting there listening to you, but their internal monologue is already gathering evidence for why your system won't work for them.
Precisely. This is called negative future pacing. They are pacing their future based on their past.
Oh.
So the mega commitment is a pattern interrupt. When you look them in the eye and say, I need you to promise me right now that you will see yourself doing what I am about to show you, you are forcing a cognitive pivot.
You're making them stop that negative loop.
Yes, you are demanding that they suspend their historical baggage. And here's the crucial part. By making them physically type yes or verbally say yes, you trigger cognitive dissonance.
Because their physical action has to match their internal belief.
Exactly. Once they type yes, they have made a public commitment. The brain hates inconsistency. So for the rest of the presentation, instead of passively looking for reasons why the system will fail, their brain is now subconsciously looking for evidence to support the promise they just made.
That is wild.
They're actively visualizing themselves succeeding. You have quite literally forced them to sell themselves on your solution before you have even presented the first step.
That is a fascinating way to look at it. So the practical takeaway here isn't just about getting chat engagement.
No, not at all.
It's about establishing a psychological contract. Before you deliver the heavy, complex content, you have to get the audience to actively agree to put down their defensive baggage and orient themselves toward a successful outcome.
But, and this is important, even with that promise secured, the defense mechanisms aren't entirely gone.
Of course not. People are stubborn.
Right. The audience might be visualizing success, but human nature means the doubts will inevitably start creeping back in, which prepares the soil for what I consider the most critical and usually the most uncomfortable part of any high-stakes presentation.
You're talking about the preemptive strike.
Yes, dragging their objections out into the light.
Because no matter how much authority you have and no matter how many times they type yes in the chat, every single person listening has a little voice in the back of their head whispering, yeah, but this won't work for me because...
Exactly. And the framework identifies the 5 major categories of these internal obstacles.
Right. Money, time, ability, confusion, and fear.
Now, the instinct of an amateur presenter is to just ignore those voices. They think, if I don't bring up the fact that this is expensive, or time-consuming, maybe the audience won't think about it.
It's the ostrich burying its head in the sand.
Exactly. But a master presenter knows that unspoken objections are fatal. If the audience is thinking it, you have to say it out loud before they do. You have to destroy the objection before it can fully form in their consciousness.
And the examples in the framework of how to destroy these objections are almost ruthlessly effective.
They really are.
Let's look at the objections of time and ability. Most people think they don't have the hours in the day or the technical skills to learn something new. The prisoner combats this not with statistics, but with extreme contrast.
The boss of our story.
Yes. They show a case study of a guy named Basavaraj. This is a man who was literally running his online business while deployed on a United Nations health mission in a war zone in Libya.
Unbelievable.
Right. He was dealing with intermittent internet, constant power outages, and active conflict.
Now think about the psychological impact of that story on a comfortable, middle-class professional sitting in an air-conditioned home office with high-speed fiber internet.
It vaporizes their excuse instantly.
It does.
Like, if you are sitting there thinking, I just don't have the time because my kids have soccer practice, and then you see Basavaraj building a business in a war zone, you literally cannot voice your objection. It feels ridiculous by comparison.
It's the strategy of extreme relativity.
Mm.
But then the framework tackles the deepest, most insidious objection of all, which is fear.
Yeah, fear is the big one.
And this is where the script flips in a brilliant way. When dealing with fear, the amateur presenter tries to be a cheerleader. They say, don't worry, this is so easy. Anyone can do it. There's nothing to be afraid of.
Which always feels like a lie. If it's a worthwhile endeavor, it's not going to be perfectly easy.
Exactly. The audience knows it's a lie, so they trust you less. Instead of denying the fear, the framework teaches you to lean directly into it.
Just hit it head on.
Yes. You acknowledge the reality of the difficulty. The presenter looks at the audience and says something along the lines of, listen, you are going to screw this up. You are going to make mistakes. There will be days when you want to quit. But I need you to declare to me right now, are you going to let fear keep you poor? Are you going to let fear dictate the rest of your life?
Wow. It's a challenge to their character, not their competence.
Exactly.
It validates the fear, but refuses to accept it as a valid excuse for inaction. Now, the framework actually outlines 3 distinct strategies for handling any objection that might arise: ignorance, disagreement, and agreement.
Let's break those down.
So ignorance simply means ignoring petty, small objections that don't move the needle. You don't get bogged down in minutia.
Right? Don't waste time on the little stuff.
Disagreement is what we saw with the Basavaraj example, using a sledgehammer of proof to show that the objection is factually false. But agreement is where we get into some truly advanced, almost paradoxical psychology.
Agreement is the domain of master communicators. It relies on the concepts of validation and reframing.
Right. Validation is when you actually agree with the audience's concern. You say out loud, you know what? You're right to be worried about the time commitment. That is a very valid concern.
It's almost like a magic trick.
It really is. The audience has their fists up, ready to fight you on this point, and you just drop your hands and agree with them.
It creates immense rapport because it proves you actually understand their reality.
Mm-hmm.
The audience feels deeply seen. Their defensive walls drop because you aren't fighting their perception.
But then you flip it.
Right. The moment those walls drop, you execute the reframe. You take that valid concern and you pivot the lens so that the negative actually becomes a positive.
Yes, this takes time. But the fact that it takes time is exactly why your competitors won't do it, which leaves the entire market wide open for you.
That's a perfect example. That's powerful.
But under this umbrella of agreement, the framework introduces a concept that I think is the most dangerous and potentially the most effective strategy in the entire text. It's called include by excluding.
Oh, this is a big one.
And to illustrate this, the source material explicitly uses Donald Trump's political marketing strategy as the prime example. Now, I want to be crystal clear to you listening. We are not discussing politics here.
No, absolutely not.
We are putting politics entirely in a box and looking strictly at the clinical, psychological marketing mechanism that the framework is highlighting.
Right, it's just about the strategy.
Exactly. The concept relies on the idea of intentionally polarizing an audience. The strategy involves deliberately and aggressively repelling a specific group of people, which has the simultaneous mathematically certain effect of intensely attracting and locking in another group.
Yes.
In a business presentation context, this means actively looking at your audience and saying, look, this software won't do your dishes for you. If you are looking for a magic button or a get-rich-quick scheme where you do zero work, please leave this webinar right now. This is absolutely not for you.
And honestly, for most people raised in traditional corporate sales or polite communication, this concept is utterly terrifying.
Totally. Because actively telling people, this is not for you, please leave, feels like self-sabotage. You spent money and time to get these people into the room or onto the webinar. Why on earth would you ever invite a portion of them to walk out the door?
Well, it comes down to the deep evolutionary psychology of tribalism and the modern dynamics of anti-sales pressure.
Unpack that for me. Anti-sales pressure first.
Sure. In modern society, human beings are hypersensitive to being sold to. We are bombarded with thousands of ads a day. We have developed sophisticated radar for desperation.
Oh, yeah. We can smell it a mile away.
Exactly. When a presenter stands on stage and acts desperate to convince every single person in the room that their product is a flawless, perfect fit for everyone, the audience's alarm bells go off. It feels inherently inauthentic because nothing is a perfect fit for everyone.
It triggers the too good to be true filter.
Exactly. But when you confidently establish boundaries, when you give people a clear, explicit out by saying, this is definitely not for everyone, and if you meet X, Y, and Z criteria, you should leave, it completely short-circuits that defensive radar.
Because it's unexpected.
Right. The audience experiences a profound sense of neurological relief because a scammer never tells you to leave. A desperate salesperson never tells you their product isn't right for you. By telling some people to leave, you implicitly prove that you are prioritizing the truth over a quick transaction.
And what happens to the people who stay? The people who realize, wait, I'm not looking for a get-rich-quick scheme. I am willing to do the work.
This is where the tribalism kicks in. The people who are the right fit lean in closer. They feel chosen. By excluding the wrong people, you have suddenly created an exclusive in-group.
A tribe.
Yes. You have drawn a circle, kicked the lazy people out, and told the people remaining, you are the serious ones. We are the same. It builds a fiercely loyal bond. The people left inside the circle no longer feel like they are being pitched to. They feel like they have qualified for a private conversation.
It's the velvet rope effect at a nightclub. The club only seems desirable because there is a bouncer actively keeping other people out.
That's a great way to put it.
So the practical execution for you listening. Before your next presentational pitch, you need to write down the top 3 to 6 unspoken objections your specific audience will have. And you must address them out loud, confidently, before your audience can even fully articulate them in their own minds.
Bring them out into the light.
Exactly. Use extreme examples to crush the mundane excuses. Validate their real fears, reframe their concerns, and most importantly, have the courage to explicitly tell them who your information is not for.
But, and here's the critical pivot in the psychological architecture. Let's map where the audience is right now.
Okay, let's look at the map.
You have established unshakable authority. You have secured their active commitment to participate. And you have systematically dismantled all their excuses and fears. You have essentially performed a psychological demolition.
You've cleared the land.
Yes. But if you stop there, you just have an empty lot. You have created a psychological void. You cannot just leave an audience devoid of fear and devoid of excuses. Nature abhors a vacuum.
That makes sense.
If you don't fill that space with something powerful, the apathy will just creep back in. You have to fill that void with a massive, motivating vision. This brings us to the next structural pillar, fostering hope and defining the why.
The framework makes it abundantly clear that taking away a person's excuses is not enough to drive them to take action. Logic and the removal of obstacles don't create momentum. Emotion creates momentum.
100%.
The source illustrates this by bringing up a testimonial from a man named Chuck. And Chuck's story is vital because of his motivation.
What was his motivation?
Well, Chuck wasn't trying to learn this new business system just to pay off a credit card or buy a nice watch. He and his wife were building a multi-million-dollar business, specifically to pass on to their children and grandchildren. The framework defines Chuck's underlying why as legacy.
And that distinction is the difference between a transactional mindset and an emotional, purpose-driven mindset.
Yeah.
A transactional goal like making an extra $500 a month is easily abandoned when the work gets difficult. But a purpose-driven goal like ensuring your grandchildren never have to worry about paying for college, that creates an almost unbreakable resilience.
It really does.
The text quotes the famous principle from the ancient Greek mathematician Archimedes: "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world."
I love this analogy so much. The framework uses Archimedes' lever as a direct metaphor for the audience's internal motivation. The why is the listener's lever. If your audience's lever is small and fragile, I want to impress my boss, it is not going to be strong enough to overcome the massive friction of learning a complex new skill or changing their behavior.
It'll just snap.
Right. But if their lever is generational legacy or total financial freedom or proving everyone who doubted me wrong, that lever is made of steel. It can move mountains.
But, and this is key, an audience rarely walks into a room with that heavy lever actively engaged.
No, they don't.
They are usually bogged down in the minutiae of their daily stress.
So the presenter's job at this stage in the introduction is to actively facilitate a process of mental time travel.
Mental time travel.
Yes. You must explicitly guide the audience by the hand out of their current present-day state of struggle, uncertainty, or mediocrity, and project them forward into a vividly imagined future.
Okay, paint the picture for me. How does a presenter actually do that without sounding incredibly cheesy?
It can be tough, but you do it by focusing on the sensory details of the outcome, not the mechanics of the process.
Give me an example. You ask them to imagine the specific feeling of waking up on a Tuesday morning and realizing they don't have an alarm clock set.
Ooh, that's good.
Or you ask them to visualize the exact look on their spouse's face when they say, "We're paying off the mortgage today." You ask them to picture how fundamentally different the physical posture of their body will be when they operate from a place of complete mastery and security rather than anxiety.
You are totally immersing them in the emotional payoff.
Completely.
Yeah.
And this is the masterstroke right at the absolute peak of that emotional visualization, when they are practically tasting that future reality. You snap them violently back to the present moment.
Whoa.
And you position the core teaching you're about to deliver as the exact structural bridge that crosses the chasm between their painful present and that beautiful future.
So the practical takeaway here isn't just to hope your audience is motivated. You don't just sprinkle some inspiring words and hope it lands.
No, you have to engineer it.
You explicitly demand that they identify their deepest motivation. You ask your audience to state their underlying why, out loud or in the chat. You tell them to hold on to that specific mental image, whether it is legacy, freedom, or reaching their ultimate potential. And you tell them to use that image as the lens through which they consume the rest of your presentation. You anchor your cold, hard facts to their deepest personal desires.
Which is incredibly powerful.
Uh-huh.
But we have to address the reality of the modern human brain here.
Okay, what's the reality?
Even if a person has found their profound why, even if they respect you implicitly, their attention span is still incredibly fragile. We live in an era of infinite distraction.
Right. You make the point that an audience isn't held captive in a physical prison cell.
They're really not.
Especially on a webinar or a Zoom call, they have a mouse, they have a phone in their pocket, they have multiple browser tabs open. They can literally click away or mentally check out in a fraction of a second the moment they feel slightly bored.
It's so easy to just open a new tab.
Exactly. You can't just rely on their good intentions. You have to actively captivate them.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps the most mechanically intricate piece of this entire psychological architecture. The final key idea: engineering mystery and intrigue.
And the framework accomplishes this through a concept it calls nested open loops, which honestly sounds like something out of a computer programming manual, but it's actually a brilliant storytelling device.
The loops within loops.
Exactly.
To understand why this works, we have to look at a psychological principle known as the Zeigarnik effect.
Okay, the Zeigarnik effect. Tell us about that.
It's named after a Russian psychologist, Buluma Zeigarnik. She was sitting in a cafe in the 1920s and noticed something fascinating about the waiters.
How were they doing?
Well, the waiters could remember incredibly complex orders. Who had the soup, who wanted their steak rare, who needed extra napkins, with perfect accuracy, right up until the moment the food was delivered and the bill was paid.
Okay.
But the absolute second the order was complete, the waiters forgot everything, the memory was wiped clean.
Because the loop was closed.
Exactly. Zeigarnik realized that the human brain holds on to incomplete tasks or unresolved information with intense cognitive focus. Unresolved tension creates a mental itch that the brain is desperate to scratch.
That makes so much sense.
But the moment the task is finished or the information is fully explained, the brain deletes it from active memory to save energy.
So, apply to a presentation. If you introduce a concept, thoroughly explain how it works, and neatly wrap it up, you have just closed the loop. The audience's brain says, great, I understand that now. I can stop paying attention.
Which is the exact opposite of what you want.
Right. So the strategy of nested open loops is to intentionally trigger the Zeigarnik effect over and over again without letting the audience scratch the itch.
Keep them itching.
Yeah. The framework explains that during your introduction, you have to tease multiple incredible insights. You promise to reveal massive secrets. But crucially, you do not resolve them in chronological order.
You scramble them.
Yes. You introduce concept A, you tell them how amazing it is, but before you explain how it works, you pivot to concept B. You tease concept B and then pivot to concept C. You are opening loop after loop after loop. The randomness is entirely intentional.
By scrambling the resolution of these ideas, you force the audience to maintain a state of hyper-attentiveness. Because they don't know when the payoff for the very first tease is finally going to come, they have to pay intense attention to every single word you say so they don't miss it.
The best analogy for this is a modern blockbuster movie trailer.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. Think about the last time you watched a trailer for a massive Marvel movie or a Christopher Nolan film. They don't just show you the first 3 minutes of the movie.
That would be so boring.
They show you the most massive explosion from the third act, then they cut to a shocking line of dialogue from the first act, then they show a character returning from the dead, but they completely scramble the timeline. They give you all the most exciting puzzle pieces, but they deliberately remove all the context of how those pieces fit together.
It creates an irresistible cognitive tension. You have no choice but to buy a ticket, sit in the theater for 2 hours, and watch the entire narrative unfold just to understand the actual plot of the trailer you already saw.
And that is exactly what you were doing in the introduction to a presentation. How you reveal your insights is actually more important than the insights themselves.
It really is the secret sauce.
If you just walk out on stage and logically, linearly lay out all your best information, if you just read the table of contents, you've created an audio textbook.
Which puts people to sleep.
It might be deeply informative, but it is incredibly dry. There is no tension. But when you introduce mystery, when you actively hold back the how, your presentation transforms from a lecture into an irresistible narrative. The audience is compelled to stay in their seats just to close the cognitive loops in their own minds.
And the framework provides a very specific mechanical trick to ensure you actually execute this correctly. It's called the first-last technique.
This blew my mind when I read it because it's totally backward from how most people work. The technique advises that you should actually write the introduction to your presentation, the part we've been talking about this entire time, the part with all the teasers and open loops. You should write that after you have already created the core body of your presentation.
It makes perfect sense when you think about it. You cannot tease the best parts of a movie if you haven't filmed the movie yet.
Exactly.
Most presenters sit down at a blank PowerPoint, right? Slide 1, welcome, and try to chronologically write their way through the talk.
Which guarantees a boring introduction because you don't even know what your best material is yet.
Yeah, you're just guessing.
The practical takeaway here is to build the heavy substance first. Build your core modules. Then go back, review your own material, and extract the most compelling, mysterious, counterintuitive elements. Use those specific elements to build your opening hook. Never give away the punchline early. You want to explicitly outline exactly what they're going to discover, and you want to paint a vivid picture of the massive benefits of that discovery. But you must completely omit the mechanics of how it works until they are deeply embedded in the main body of the presentation.
Let's pull all the way back and look at the massive structure we've just built. We have covered an immense amount of psychological ground here, moving from evolutionary biases to cognitive dissonance to the Zeigarnik effect.
We really have.
If we synthesize all of this, what is the overarching paradigm shift for the listener?
Well, for me, the ultimate realization is that a successful presentation, a successful pitch, or even just a successful conversation where you need to be heard does not begin when you start delivering the cold, hard fact.
No, it doesn't.
The battle is won or lost before you ever get to your first bullet point. It starts the absolute millisecond you open your mouth.
That is the soul of this framework. When you tie these 5 pillars together, you realize that an introduction is not just a polite welcome. It is not a table of contents. It is a highly sophisticated, sequential, psychological rewiring process.
Rewiring, yeah.
By deliberately establishing unshakable authority, securing active physiological commitments, systematically destroying their hidden objections, fostering a profound sense of hope for their future, and meticulously layering mystery and cognitive tension. You aren't just warming up an audience.
You are literally calibrating their brain.
You are creating the perfect mental ecosystem for your message to take root. You are systematically dismantling their natural skepticism and replacing it with eager, hungry anticipation. You are guaranteeing that they not only hear your material, but that they are psychologically primed to succeed with it.
It changes everything about how you prepare to speak. So now that you listening know exactly how to build this bulletproof introduction, now that you know how to make an audience hang on your every word before you've even taught them anything, you were probably wondering the next logical question.
Right. What's next?
How do you actually transition? Once you have all this incredible momentum, all this mystery and authority, how do you pivot into delivering the dense core content without suddenly becoming boring?
It's a tricky pivot.
How do you teach the heavy mechanics without losing the magic of the introduction? Well, that transition and the delivery of the core content is exactly what we're going to tackle next time.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a lens through which to view the world this week. We want you to actively look for this matrix out in the wild.
Yes, observe it happening.
The next time you are watching a high-level politician give a speech, or you are observing a master salesperson working a room, or even as you watch the opening sequence of a brilliant movie or documentary, pay incredibly close attention to the very first 5 minutes.
Just the first 5 minutes.
Look past the surface level of what they're saying and ask yourself, how are they proving their authority without bragging? What specific, subtle identities are they trying to force me into? What tiny, almost invisible agreements are they getting me to commit to without me even consciously realizing it?
Once you see the underlying architecture, you will never sit through a presentation the same way again. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. You know, the 5 secret ingredients to a wildly profitable presentation, right? I mean, we've all heard them. Authority, commitment, overcoming objections, painting a picture of hope, and weaving in mystery.
Yeah, the classic pillars.
Right, the pillars. But what happens when you actually sit down, you're staring at a blank screen, and you have absolutely no idea how to stitch them together without sounding like, a desperate infomercial.
It is terrifying.
It is. You just sit there, the cursor is blinking at you, literally mocking you, and you suddenly realize that knowing the ingredients is vastly different from, well, actually baking the cake.
Oh, completely, because the architecture of a presentation is... it's the ultimate bottleneck. I mean, you can possess this profound market-disrupting knowledge, but if you cannot construct the psychological vehicle to deliver it, that knowledge is just trapped.
Yeah, it doesn't go anywhere.
Exactly. It's not about the value you hold. It's about the cognitive bandwidth of the audience to actually receive it. And if the intro fails, the bandwidth drops to 0.
Which is the exact tension we are resolving today. We are looking at a very specific stack of source material for this deep dive. Specifically, we're getting into Chapter 4, pages 93 to 96, of some highly guarded, direct response marketing playbooks.
This is the really good stuff.
Oh, it's pure gold. This section is literally titled The Introduction, Putting It All Together. And our mission today is to extract the ultimate blueprint for you. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a founder, a creator, we are going to deconstruct this completely counterintuitive, modular approach that takes all the pressure off you to be a quote-unquote great writer.
Which is a huge relief for most people, I think.
Huge. Instead, we're looking at a plug-and-play method for crafting a high-converting 10-minute opening. We are moving entirely out of theory today and purely into execution.
Yeah, function over literary flow. Because when people study these playbooks, they usually grasp the individual psychological triggers, right? Like they understand they need authority, they know they need a hook.
Sure, the concepts make sense.
Right, but where the breakdown occurs is the structural framework to deploy those triggers efficiently. This text is fascinating because it treats the introduction not as an essay, but as a mechanism. It is like a literal engineering schematic for human attention.
Okay, so let's start with the constraint that drives this entire mechanism.
Yeah.
The source text outlines those 5 core objectives we mentioned that must be accomplished right out of the gate.
Right.
Number 1, establishing authority so they actually listen. Number 2, creating commitment so they're actively engaged. Number 3, dealing with their objections in advance.
Crucial.
Yeah, absolutely crucial. Number 4, fostering hope for the future. And number 5, creating mystery and intrigue. But here is the kicker. The total runtime allowed for this massive psychological payload It's about 10 minutes.
Just think about the cognitive load of what you just
Well,
listed.
it's absurd.
It is. Most founders would argue they need an hour just to establish their authority.
Yeah.
But placing a hard 10-minute boundary on those 5 pillars is actually a profound psychological advantage. It forces brutal prioritization.
See, I buy that in theory, but 10 minutes to do all of that sounds like a recipe for just a panicked, high-speed wamble.
Whoa.
I mean, it feels like taking a massive, complex B2B sales pitch or like a deeply nuanced educational seminar and trying to compress it into a TikTok video. How do you fit all these massive concepts into 10 minutes without it turning into a chaotic, unreadable mess?
Actually, the chaos comes from having too much time, not too little.
Wait, really?
Yeah, think about the threat detection system in the modern buyer's brain. When a prospect logs onto a webinar or a demo, their immediate subconscious question is this person going to waste my time?
Oh, 100%. I think that within the first 30 seconds.
Exactly. So if you give yourself unlimited time to build authority, you default to indulgence. You read your resume. You ramble about your company history. A 10-minute constraint prevents you from triggering the audience's boredom reflex. It establishes this aggressive, confident pacing.
So you're basically proving your competence by not wasting their time.
Yes. You are sub-communicating to them, I respect your time, I know exactly what I am doing, and every second of this matters.
That boredom reflex is so real, though. I was on a webinar a few weeks ago, a sauce product demo. Actually, completely different from a standard info product pitch.
Right. Totally different vibe.
And the founder spent the first 22 minutes talking about his childhood.
Oh, no.
Yes. His early struggles with coding, the 3 failed startups he had before this one. I mean, by minute 15, I was checking my email. By minute 20, I had completely checked out. He hadn't given me a single reason to care about my problems yet.
That is the classic ego trip trap. Presenters often confuse establishing authority with, recounting their biography.
Yeah, it felt like a therapy session.
Right, and the audience's brain is highly selfish. It only processes information through the lens of survival and resource acquisition. They literally do not care about your coding struggles unless those struggles directly translate to a faster, cheaper, or better outcome for them.
So the constraint fixes that.
Exactly. The 10-minute constraint acts as a filter. It strips away the biography and leaves only the functional proof. It forces you to establish authority through positioning and direct results, rather than just self-indulgent storytelling.
But on the flip side of that, you have the people who are so terrified of sounding arrogant that they skip the intro entirely.
Oh yeah, the humbler-than-thou approach.
Right. They turn on the camera, say, hey guys, and just jump straight into a spreadsheet or a slide deck of super dry content.
Which is equally disastrous. Because if you dive straight into the content without calibrating the room, you haven't earned the right to instruct them.
Well, context is just missing.
Right. The audience has no framework to value the information you're giving them. You're handing them a diamond, but because you didn't establish your status as an expert jeweler, they just assume it's a shiny rock. The 10-minute structure we're looking at here solves both extremes. It builds the pedestal, but it builds it rapidly.
Okay, so we have the constraint. 10 minutes, let's actually rip apart the engine and see how the pistons fire. The playbook gives us a meticulous, slide-by-slide breakdown of an actual presentation, the $1 Million Webinars intro.
It really is a masterpiece of efficiency.
It is, and it starts incredibly simply, just a title slide, nothing revolutionary there. But immediately after the title, it moves to setting an agenda. And here's where the text points out a major pivot.
Yeah, this is a huge shift.
The agenda isn't just a table of contents. It doubles as a commitment frame. It asks the audience to actively agree to something right there in minute 2. And to enforce this, the presenter drops a quote from Bob Proctor, who's this massive name in personal development.
Let's isolate the cognitive mechanics of that agenda slide, because it's brilliant. In a standard presentation, an agenda is just a passive transfer of data. You are saying, first we will do A, then B.
And the audience just leans back and glazes over.
Exactly. They become spectators. But by weaving a compliance request into the agenda, asking them to commit to visualizing their success or commit to taking notes, you are shifting the power dynamic.
You're forcing them to participate.
Yes. You are explicitly stating this is a two-way transaction. I am going to give you high-value information, but you must pay me with your active focus.
But wait, walk me through the mechanics of the Bob Proctor quote. Is that just cheap name dropping?
Not at all.
Because throwing a celebrity quote on a slide usually screams, I read a quote book before I got on stage. How does that actually force commitment?
It is entirely about borrowed behavioral authority. If you, as the presenter, just say, you need to focus and visualize your goals today, it can sound a bit preachy. The audience might resist.
Like, who are you to tell me what to do?
Precisely. But when you anchor that behavioral request to a globally recognized authority figure, using Proctor's quote about thoughts becoming things, you bypass the resistance entirely.
Ah, because you aren't demanding they do it. Bob Proctor is demanding they do it.
Exactly. You are using the halo effect of his status to validate the necessity of the audience's active participation. It makes them feel like they are engaging in a high-level, proven methodology, not just humoring some presenter's request.
Okay, that makes sense. You are basically outsourcing the authoritative demand. Now, right after securing that commitment, the presentation transitions into the how today came to be story. And this is where the psychology gets really, really layered.
So clever.
The presenter tells an origin story. They talk about joining Joe Polish's highly exclusive $25,000 mastermind group. Now, just being in the room is a massive status flex.
A huge flex.
But instead of saying, I was the smartest guy there, the presenter admits to feeling completely out of their depth. They say they didn't feel like they had much to contribute to a room of titans. They reluctantly volunteer for a 10-minute spotlight and end up blowing everyone away by deconstructing a launch that did almost $10 million.
The structural brilliance of that narrative cannot be overstated. It is playing multiple psychological chords simultaneously.
I see where you're going, but let's pressure test that for a second. Why take the long way around?
What do you mean?
If your ultimate punchline is, I made $10 million, why wrap it in the story of feeling inadequate? Why not just lead with the massive financial proof and establish ultimate dominance immediately?
Because the human brain is highly attuned to status threats.
Status threats.
Yeah. If you walk into a room or a webinar and immediately beat your chest and declare your supreme success, the audience's amygdala flags you as a potential threat to their own status.
Oh, wow.
They cross their arms. They think, oh, this guy thinks he's better than me. Let's see if he's really that smart. You trigger skepticism instantly.
Your defense shields go up.
Exactly. The vulnerability in the how today came to be story is basically a cognitive Trojan horse. By framing the multi-million-dollar success within a story of imposter syndrome, admitting they felt small in a room of giants, the presenter disarms the audience's threat detection.
Because the audience relates to the feeling of inadequacy. We all know what it feels like to be the dumbest person in a high-status room.
Right. It creates tribal belonging. You're essentially saying, I'm just like you, I get nervous too.
So empathy is established first.
Precisely. Once the audience views the presenter as a relatable peer, the defensive shields drop. And then only then the presenter detonates the payload, the $10 million launch.
And it lands differently because of the setup.
Completely differently. Because the empathy is already there, the financial proof doesn't land as a threat or a boast. It lands as an inspiring outcome. The audience thinks, wow, this relatable, humble person can achieve that. Maybe I can too.
It softens the boast while actually amplifying the authority.
Yes, and furthermore, simply mentioning the $25,000 buy-in implicitly positions the presenter as an elite player who invests heavily in their own growth. And they do it without ever actually having to say, I am elite.
That is wild. It's multi-layered positioning, completely masked as a humble anecdote, but the escalation doesn't stop there.
Oh, we're just getting started.
Right. We are still within this 10-minute window, moving into the next phase of proof. After dropping the $10 million personal result, the presenter doesn't linger. They immediately pivot to showing how they helped others.
The transition from personal success to client success.
Yeah. And the text highlights the use of specific names here. Garrett Gunderson, John Carter, showing their massive success using the system. Then another rapid pivot, sharing a very recent, fresh success, a $1.7 million result from a webinar that literally just happened.
Right.
And this whole sequence reaches its peak when Joe Polish, the head of this elite mastermind, urges the presenter to share these secrets with the outside world. This is the exact moment they transition into the open loops, the mystery.
If you map the neurology of that specific sequence, it is a perfectly engineered ladder of belief, because competence in oneself does not automatically equal competence in teaching.
Right, it's the great player, terrible coach syndrome.
Exactly. And the audience knows this intuitively. So the presenter starts with, I achieved this, to prove baseline competence. But to prevent the audience from thinking, well, that's just a fluke for you, they immediately step up the ladder. I can teach others to achieve this.
They provide third-party validation through Gunderson and Carter.
Yes. Now, the system is proven to be transferable.
But there's still the recency bias objection, right?
which is the very next rung on the ladder.
Yeah.
The audience will naturally wonder, sure, it worked 2 years ago, but does it work today?
Will it work in today's economy?
Exactly. And the presenter crushes that objection instantly by dropping the $1.7 million result from a recent event. It proves the methodology is current and resilient to market changes.
Okay, but then there's the Jer Polish moral imperative part. I have to admit, that feels a bit, I don't know, orchestrated to me. Like, oh, my mentor begged me to share this with you. It plays a little dramatic.
It is highly orchestrated, yes, but it is entirely necessary to align with tribal mechanics.
How so?
When Joe Polish, the line between cheap clickbait and profound intrigue is entirely determined by the foundation of proof beneath it.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Clickbait is an unearned promise. It demands your attention before establishing any credibility. The reason this specific framework works is because the open loops are deployed only after the psychological ladder of belief has been fully scaled.
So the right to tease has to be purchased with proof.
Yes. Think about the dopamine response. Dopamine is not the chemical of reward. It is the chemical of anticipating a reward. But the brain will only release dopamine if it believes the reward is actually attainable.
That makes sense.
If a stranger on the street promises you $1 million secret, your brain dismisses it. No dopamine. But if an established expert who has just systematically proved their personal success, their student success, the current relevance of their methods, and has the backing of industry titans, if that person promises you a secret,
Your brain believes the payoff is real.
exactly. The dopamine spikes, the open loops, the here is what you will discover slides act as cognitive hooks. They drag the listener out of the introduction and deep into the dense content section because the anticipation of the reward is now scientifically validated by the preceding proof.
I love that distinction. Clickbait is unearned anticipation. This is scientifically validated anticipation.
That's a great way to put it.
All right, so we are nearing the final minutes of this 10-minute pressure cooker. We've hit authority, commitment, proof, and mystery. We are entering the final phase outlined in the text, which they call the darkness and the dawn.
This is arguably the most critical junction in the entire intro.
Really?
Yes, this is where the emotional resonance of the entire presentation is forged.
So the playbook describes this jarring moment where the presenter stops talking about millions of dollars and faces the audience's worst nightmares head on. They literally look into the camera and say something like, you might have absolutely no free time, you might have never built a funnel before, or maybe you've tried all this stuff and failed miserably.
This is a dark pivot.
It is. They deliberately dragged the ugliest worst-case scenarios right into the light. But a split second after validating these deep, dark objections, they pivot violently to the ultimate hope. Happier customers, total lifestyle freedom, never checking your bank account again. It's like emotional whiplash.
You and I both know the basic sales concept of pacing and leading, right?
Sure, meeting them where they are and taking them where you want them to go.
Right. But what we're looking at here is a highly advanced application. They aren't just pacing standard objections like it costs too much. They're aggressively pacing negative trauma.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of pacing negative trauma, because that sounds super risky. Why dredge up their worst memories right when you want them feeling good?
Because before you can successfully lead a prospect to a new desired destination, the dawn of financial or operational freedom, you must deeply anchor yourself in their current painful reality. You literally have to walk into the darkness with them.
To prove you get it.
Exactly. The audience has an inner monologue running during your entire presentation. It is a silent filter. They are listening to your massive success and thinking, sure, it worked for the guy with the $25,000 mastermind, but I have no tech skills. I have a day job, and my last launch was a disaster. This won't work for me.
It's the silent objection, and if you don't answer it, it basically invalidates everything else you say.
Precisely. It acts as a cognitive block. By voicing their darkest insecurities aloud, the presenter achieves two massive things. First, they create a profound, almost telepathic bond.
Because you're reading their mind.
Yes. When you accurately describe a pain that the prospect thought was unique to them, they subconsciously assume you must also possess the perfect cure.
Yeah.
Second, you strip the fear of its power. You drag the elephant into the light.
But doesn't this trigger the flight response? Like, if I'm trying to sell a high-ticket coaching program and I remind the audience that they've failed 3 times before, aren't I just putting them in a depressed, defeated state of mind right before I ask them for money?
It feels incredibly counterintuitive, I know. But the neurological reality is actually the opposite. Ignoring the elephant doesn't make the audience happy. It makes them anxious, because they know you aren't addressing the real issue.
Oh, that's interesting.
Acknowledging their past failures provides immense catharsis. It is a relief to be seen and understood. You are validating their struggle. You are telling them, it's okay that you failed, it wasn't your fault, you just didn't have this specific mechanism.
You clear out the mental debris.
Yes, you cannot build a new paradigm of hope on a foundation of unaddressed anxiety. You clear the debris, you establish that telepathic level of trust, and then because they trust that you truly understand their pain, they will inherently trust your vision of their future pleasure.
So the whiplash to the dawn, that vivid visualization of freedom, is only believable because the darkness was perfectly accurate.
Exactly. You earn the dawn by surviving the darkness.
Wow. So we've mapped the entire landscape of this 10-minute masterpiece. We've seen the agenda commitment, the Trojan horse origin story, the escalation of proof, the moral mandate, the dopamine-driven open loops, and now the pacing of negative trauma.
It is an incredibly dense piece of psychological engineering.
It is. Which brings us to the most practical, terrifying question of this entire deep dive for anyone listening right now.
How to actually do it.
Yes. How on earth do you actually write this? Because if I sit down at a blank Google Doc, looking at that blinking cursor, and I try to write a 10-minute script that weaves status differentials, dopamine loops, and trauma pacing into a perfectly linear, beautifully flowing narrative,
Your brain will shut down.
my prefrontal cortex is going to completely lock up. It's paralyzing.
And that paralysis is the exact reason why brilliant founders often have terrible presentations. They attempt to write a psychological mechanism the exact same way they were taught to write an academic essay in high school.
Beginning, middle, and end.
Right. Which brings us to the mechanical secret of Chapter 4. They call it the puzzle piece strategy.
This was my favorite part of the whole text.
The text offers a wildly liberating solution to this paralysis. The answer to how you write this complex interwoven introduction is, you don't.
You just don't write it.
You abandon linear writing entirely. You don't start at slide 1 and try to flow smoothly to slide 2. Instead, you create the presentation completely out of order as a series of disconnected, isolated assets.
This is a fundamental shift in presentation design because you bypass the inner critic entirely.
You do.
The playbook suggests you just ask yourself highly targeted, isolated questions. You sit down and ask, okay, what are the 3 best testimonials I have? And you build 1 slide for that. Done. Then you ask, what is the single biggest fear my audience has right now? And you build a slide for that. Done. You are just manufacturing single disconnected slides for each specific psychological objective we just talked
That
about.
changes everything.
I was thinking about this, and the best analogy I could come up with is the difference between carving a statue out of a single block of marble versus building something out of Legos.
Ooh, that's a good analogy.
Because if you are a founder trying to write a presentation start to finish, you are carving marble. You make one wrong strike with the chisel, like one clunky transition, one weird tangent, and the entire structure feels compromised. It's incredibly high stakes and stressful.
And then you start over.
Exactly. But the puzzle piece strategy is just playing with Legos. You aren't building the final structure. You are just manufacturing brightly colored blocks. You build a blue testimonial block. You build a red hope block. You build a dark gray objection block.
Right.
And you can build them on completely different days if you want. You focus 100% of your energy on making that single block as potent and structurally sound as possible without ever worrying about how it connects to the others.
That analogy perfectly captures the neurological advantage of this method. When you attempt linear writing, you are forcing 2 opposing brain functions to operate simultaneously.
Generating and editing at the same time.
Yes, you are trying to use the creative, generative part of your brain to come up with compelling hooks, while simultaneously engaging the hypercritical editing part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, to worry about segues, transitions, and flow.
They just cancel each other out.
Yeah.
You write a great hook and immediately think, but how does that connect to my bio? And the momentum dies.
Exactly. The cognitive interference is massive. By separating the creation phase from the assembly phase, you eliminate that friction. You manufacture the Lego blocks purely in a state of generation. Then, once you have a pile of highly optimized, psychologically dense blocks, you switch into the assembly phase and literally just snap them together.
But let me challenge the assembly phase for a second. Let's say I have my pile of highly optimized Lego blocks. I have a slide about a $10 million launch, and I have a slide about the audience being terrified of technology. If I just violently snap those two disconnected ideas together without writing a smooth, elegant transition,
Yeah.
won't the final presentation feel incredibly jarring?
You'd think so.
Right. Won't it sound robotic, like I'm just reading down a checklist of marketing tactics?
That is the logical fear of every writer, but it fundamentally misunderstands how the human brain processes information. The source text reveals this fascinating reality about the assembly phase. When you stack these highly targeted puzzle pieces together, they almost always magically gel.
Okay, magically gel sounds like a bit of a cop-out to me. What is actually happening in the brain there?
It's rooted in Gestalt psychology, the concept of pattern completion. The human brain is a relentless meaning-making machine. It absolutely abhors a vacuum.
Okay.
So if you present the brain with two seemingly disparate but highly emotionally charged pieces of information, the audience's brain will automatically do the work of creating the narrative tissue between them.
Wait, so the audience writes the transition in their own head?
Yes, if you show a slide demonstrating a massive financial result, and the very next slide violently pivots to a common objection like, I don't have enough time,
Yeah.
you do not need to spend 3 paragraphs elegantly segueing between them.
You don't need a bridge?
You don't. The juxtaposition itself does the heavy lifting. The audience's brain instantly bridges the gap. They think, he achieved this massive result, and now he's addressing the fact that I don't have time to do it. He must have a time-saving solution. The brain connects the Lego blocks for you.
That is incredible. So the friction of the clunky transition actually forces active listening. The audience leans in to connect the dots.
And furthermore, the sheer psychological potency of the client triggers the deep empathy of pacing trauma, the undeniable proof of the testimonials, the dopamine spike of the open loops. It all operates at a much deeper emotional level than literary flow.
They're too invested to care about the segue.
Precisely. The audience is feeling so understood and so hopeful that they literally do not care if your segue was a little blunt.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most liberating concept in Chapter 4, function over form, or what I like to call the not art mindset.
This is the ultimate unburdening for the entrepreneur.
It really is. The playbook concludes with this blunt reality. A webinar introduction, a sales pitch, a demo. It is a vehicle for conversion. It is a utility tool. It is not a piece of fine art destined for a museum.
No one is giving out Oscars for webinar scripts.
Right. The author argues that even the most basic, clunky, utilitarian structure works wildly well. If you literally just stand up and say, here is why you should listen to me. Here is the massive result I got for others. Here is the beautiful future you can have. Here are the painful challenges stopping you. Now let's get to business. That blunt instrument actually converts.
It converts because it delivers the precise psychological nutrients the audience requires to make a decision. The not art mindset is basically a weapon against perfectionism. And in the context of business, perfectionism is rarely about high standards. It is almost always a subconscious hiding place.
Ouch. Okay, let's dig into that for a second. Perfectionism as a hiding place.
When an entrepreneur spends 3 weeks agonizing over the font choices on their agenda slide, or trying to rewrite a transition so it sounds perfectly poetic, they aren't improving the conversion rate.
Yeah, what are they doing?
They are stalling. They are protecting their ego from the vulnerability of actually launching the presentation and facing the market's judgment.
They are saying, I can't fail if I never finish polishing it.
Exactly. The puzzle piece method strips away that ego defense. It forces you to view your presentation as a functional tool, like a hammer or a wrench. You don't polish a wrench, you use it to turn a bolt.
Right.
When you adopt this mindset, you stop asking the ego-driven question, does this presentation make me look smart and eloquent? And you start asking the purely utilitarian question, does this slide make the prospect feel safe, understood, and hopeful?
Does it turn the bolt? That is the only metric that matters. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's synthesize the absolute soul of these 4 pages.
Let's do it.
We've covered the evolutionary psychology of the 10-minute constraint, the mechanics of borrowed authority, the Trojan horse of vulnerability, dopamine-driven open loops, trauma pacing, and Gestalt pattern completion. That's a lot.
It's a massive amount of psychology.
It is. But if we distill it all down, it is this. Linear thinking and artistic perfectionism are the enemies of persuasion. They will keep you paralyzed behind a blinking cursor forever. By embracing the disjointed, modular Lego block method, you completely bypass your inner critic.
You free yourself up to just build.
Yeah, you can rapidly engineer an airtight 10-minute introduction that does all the heavy psychological lifting. It establishes undeniable authority, it disarms deep-seated fears, and it violently hooks your audience's attention. And you achieve all of this purely by treating the presentation as an engineered mechanism rather than a literary masterpiece.
You transition from being a frustrated writer to being a highly effective persuasion architect.
Yeah.
You're simply assembling blocks of influence.
Assembling blocks of influence? I absolutely love that. You are no longer staring at the blank screen wondering how to bake the perfect cake. You are just grabbing the raw psychological ingredients and throwing them in the bowl.
And letting the oven do the work.
Exactly. Now, assuming you've built this incredibly dense 10-minute introduction, your audience is hanging on your every word, they've committed their time, and their dopamine levels are spiked, waiting for the secrets we have to actually deliver the goods.
That's the catch, isn't it?
It is. We have to transition into the content section. And this is where the playbook gets really, really counterintuitive. Because even though the content section is 4 to 6 times longer than the intro, it is actually much, much easier to create.
So much easier.
But only if you know the exact framework for mapping out your core concepts without completely overwhelming the audience. And that blueprint is exactly what we are going to extract in our next deep dive.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.